So welcome. I'll open this meeting. It's just now 6 o'clock. And if we could have a roll call, please.
Councilmember Edwards.
Here.
Councilmember Higley.
Here.
Vice Mayor Harrod.
Here.
Mayor Mitchell.
Here. And I just want to mention that Councilmember Kelly is not well tonight. So last minute, she simply can't make it. She's just homesick with her and her children. So wanted to let you know that. So if you'd join me in the Pledge of Allegiance, please.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, somebody want to move to approve the agenda?
So moved. Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Okay. Report on closed session. We did not have a closed session today. So announcements and presentations. So we have a couple of proclamations tonight. Recognizing March 2025 as Red Cross Month. And Harrod will read that one.
A proclamation of the City Council of the City of Healdsburg recognizing March 2025 as American Red Cross Month in the City of Healdsburg. Whereas this March, we celebrate American Red Cross Month by recognizing the compassionate acts of people in the City of Healdsburg and by renewing our commitment to lend a helping hand to our neighbors in need. And whereas since Clara Barton founded the American Red Cross almost 150 years ago, generation after generation has stepped up to deliver relief and care across our country and around the world. And whereas the volunteers, blood and platelet donors, and financial supporters who now give back through the Sonoma-Napa Disaster Response Area of the American Red Cross remain unwavering in their commitment to prevent and alleviate human suffering in the face of today's emergencies. And whereas these voluntary and generous contributions shine a beacon of hope in people's darkest hours, whether it's delivering shelter, food, and comfort during disasters, providing critical blood donations for hospital patients, supporting service members, veterans and their families, saving lives with first aid, CPR, AED, and other skills, and delivering international aid and reconnecting loved ones separated by global crises. And whereas this work to uplift our community is truly made possible by those who selflessly answer the call to help whenever and wherever it's needed. Now therefore be proclaimed, the City Council of the City of Healdsburg hereby recognizes March 2025 as American Red Cross Month in the City of Healdsburg and encourages all citizens of Healdsburg to reach out and support its humanitarian mission.
Thank you. And we have Andy, is it Winton here? No, from the Red Cross. Thank you.
Push the button
Push
there.
the button push the button.
That one right there. Now the green light's on. Okay, thank you very much. I had a new face for you to meet tonight, but she unfortunately probably has the same thing that Ms. Kelly has. She woke up achy and coughing and told me that she thought she would be better not to visit with you tonight. So her name is Natalie Henry, and she's our emergency response coordinator, works with, when we have a disaster in Sonoma County, works out of the EOC at the county with other cities, coordinating their efforts to respond. Much of what Red Cross does is covered in the proclamation. Essentially, we have two areas that we work in. One is called Blue Sky and one is called Gray Sky. Gray Sky are those disasters that you read about, like the LA fire recovery that's going on still, one of the worst disasters in the history of our country. The floods and hurricanes in both the West and in Florida and the Carolinas. I think there's a flood going on in Kentucky right now. American Red Cross has volunteers that come from all over the country to help and assist in those disasters. 90% of the work of the American Red Cross is done by unpaid volunteers who raise their hands and want to help their community and other communities. When I said blue sky activities, those are our preparation times when we're getting ready for any kind of disaster or malady that might strike. We do a lot of training in first aid for different communities. We install smoke alarms in the homes of those people that don't have them. And we work with many fire departments around the county, offering to provide them with our alarms if they have people that they know need them and they want to install them. So we hope that that will continue. We also do an elementary school program called Prepare with Pedro, where we teach kids how to deal and be prepared for fire safety in their own homes. All of these programs, again, supported by volunteers, but it's the relationships with the city of Healdsburg and the other cities and counties that make us be successful the way we are. So we want to thank you for the proclamation, but more importantly, thank you for your cooperation. I was a volunteer in the Kincaid Fire working at the community center just up the road a ways and up the hill. And we appreciated all our work with the city of Healdsburg then and going forward in the future. So thank you very much for the proclamation. We appreciate it.
Thank you. And we have one more proclamation. Can you stick around and get a photo with all of us? Okay, thank you.
Follow each other around.
So we have another proclamation tonight recognizing March 2025 as Women's History Month. And I'll go ahead and read that. Whereas women have always played a critical role in shaping the economic, cultural, and social fabric of our society through their participation in the labor force, working both inside and outside the home in leadership positions and through creative inspiration. And Women's History Month provides an opportunity for schools and communities to expand and enhance what our children and our community know about women's roles in history and their contributions to the development of this nation. And the story of the American woman is the story of women of all ages, races, and cultural backgrounds who led campaigns for equality and civil rights, advanced professional and educational opportunities, founded entirely new enterprises, and contributed significantly to the arts, sciences, and humanistic causes. And women from every background have long recognized that an uneven playing field will never bring equality or justice, and we all need to eliminate bias and discrimination entirely from our lives and institutions. And the 2025 theme for Women's History Month is Moving Forward Together, Women Educating and Inspiring Generations, which celebrates the collective strength and influence of women who have dedicated their lives to education, mentorship, and leadership. And whereas Women's History Month is both a call to acknowledge outstanding women we know by name and to pay homage to the dedication of nameless women who contributed to our nations. Now therefore be it proclaimed by the City Council of the City of Healdsburg hereby declares March 2025 as Women's History Month in the City of Healdsburg. And we have Gina Fortuna Dixon here to receive the proclamation.
Thank you, Mayor, council members. It's great to be back here and to hear about a strong woman who forged a entity that has assisted the entire country for hundreds of years. As you heard, I'll sit closer. All right. As you heard, this is a call to acknowledge outstanding women that we know by name and to pay homage to those dedicated nameless women who contribute to our nation. Women like Clara Barton, women like Amelia Earhart, who refusing gender stereotypes and the status quo took to the sky. Women like Rosa Parks, who sat down to stand up for racial equality. Women like Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who was only the second woman to serve as a Supreme Court justice. And she advised us to fight for the things you care about, but do it in a way that will lead others to join you. And boy, we have some things to fight for right now. That couldn't be more poignant than now. We're facing the revision of diversity, equity, and inclusion measures. We're facing the breakdown of protections of women's access to health care and that continued fight for equitable pay. It's infuriating, inconceivable, and it's easy to get mired down in the details of those large-scale fights. It reminds me of when I was learning to snowboard. If any of you have ever tried to snowboard, you know that you spend 97% of the time on your backside. And it can be really frustrating and infuriating. Like, why do I keep falling? And as I'm hitting the ground over and over again, for the 90th time, I'm laying there like, this is not the sport for me. And someone cruises by on their skis. Maybe you know that skiers and snowboarders sometimes don't have the best relationships out on the slopes. But that's not the way I saw it, because this person said to me, hey, look up. And when I did, what I saw was a beautiful view. I could never have seen that from down at the bottom of the mountain waiting in the lodge. Saw the sky, the mountains, the snow, the sun coming up over those snow-capped mountains. And I was able to enjoy that moment for what it was. When we are fighting for our rights, we also need to see that bigger picture. Don't miss the beauty for the trees. Don't miss the individual wins that we have every single day. The beauty of women everywhere working together towards one end, and the male allies that stand with us as we fight for those rights. And of those women who are out there facing the consequences of the decisions that are being made, and those fighting in the seats at the decision-making tables for our voices to be heard. Women making changes every day in their community. Women like Laura Fish Somersall, the tribal leader who you recognized recently, and her commitment to preserving tradition and teaching the next generation. And Councilmember Kelly, who, when she heard that I was running to be elected to the Windsor Town Council, reached out to me to offer support and advice about small town campaigns. When we continue to acknowledge each other for these everyday wins, that's when we can win the fight. Thank you.
Thank you. Could you come up? We'll give you the proclamation, get a picture, and then Andy after that.
Yep. We can take one together.
Yeah, you get to keep
Okay.
that.
Thank you again for having us every year.
Thank you.
It is our fun little circuit that we do.
Yeah. Thank you for that. And next we have our annual police department update. Lieutenant, sorry, Chief Jenkins.
I can be whatever you'd like tonight. So thank you, Mayor Mitchell. Good evening, council. It's always a pleasure to be here to provide this update to council. I think each year as I do these presentations, sometimes there's a little bit of a theme to them. Last year, we talked a lot about some staffing, as well as increased demands for police response. I think both of those still ring true a little bit for last year, but more importantly, we had a lot of good police work I'm going to hopefully try and highlight tonight as we go through. Next slide. So if we start with our major accomplishments, the first thing I want to highlight is we promoted 2 sergeants, Tegan Mason and Ryan Ranke, from the rank of officer to sergeant. Sergeant is probably one of the most fundamentally important positions within the police department. They're that first line supervisor working around the clock, making sure that everything that we want to be happening as the police department is happening on each shift. And having a full contingent of sergeants is really beneficial to us as an administration and a city to have them out there doing that. We also hired one police officer, Carlos Soto. We put him through the academy last year, graduated in May, and became a full-fledged solo officer late in 24. And the other thing we are working on in this is establishing a recruitment pipeline. And we start this in the high school. As you know, we've been involved with the high school internship program for many years. This year, we've also begun working with the Skills USA program, serving as mentors for the crime scene investigation and criminal justice programs within the Skills USA, help kind of increase our reach there. Also working with SSU, going into classrooms, doing presentations, continuing to build that network, and then also doing additional work within the police academy to just try and bolster all those opportunities that we can get to help with staffing and have that reach and touch. On the technology side, we're working to implement the public safety camera program that council approved last year. It's proven to be a little bit more complex with the installation than we initially thought, and we are working through those complexities, and we're hoping that it'll be live summertime if everything continues to move smooth from the hurdles we've overcome to this point. The department also implemented a data analysis and investigation software. And what this really does is takes multiple databases and systems that we have and combines it to allow us to do Google-like searches within the information that really aids in our investigative capabilities. And it's also helped me get a better in-depth look at some of the data trends that are going on here in the way that it can present stuff versus what I had available to me before. Finally, on the technology, we're just a few weeks away from launching updated public portal for crime and incident information. This is where people can go. They can see what crimes are happening. They can read the media logs as they're published each week. And that's accessible through the police department website or by going to healdsburg.citizenrims.com. That will be, again, live within a few weeks. And then finally, on the emergency management side, we had an updated emergency operations plan. Again, that was something that came before council last year and was a pretty heavy lift from the emergency management side of things. And we're happy to see that completed with the new plan. Next slide. So as a quick overview for department statistics for the year, as we start there with the incidents, those were up about 8.5% over last year. We'll dive into those a little bit further, but if you see by all the little green up arrows indicating all those areas were increases over the prior year. The one red down arrow is police reports. Those were only down by 3 from the previous year, so statistically not very significant. Phone calls into our dispatch center were up about 7%. If you look at traffic stops, we had almost 2,700 traffic stops. That was one of the department goals that I had for us last year, was to increase our traffic enforcement efforts. That number represents about 24% increase over the number of traffic stops from the prior year. And really what we're trying to achieve here is helping to address some of the poor driving behavior that sometimes you may hear about as council. I know I hear about it regularly from members of the community. And the other part is hoping to reduce collisions. And we did see a pretty significant decrease in collisions by about 1/4 or 25% last year over the prior year. And then on the last column over there with records is that part of the department that can often go unnoticed. But they're really a workhorse of the department. They're providing a lot of back-end support. Each report that we write has to go through them. They're responsible for reporting crime statistics to the FBI and the state. They process all requests for reports. So anytime someone is involved in an incident and they would like a copy of that, they process that. They processed nearly 1,000 of those requests last year. In addition to that, our district attorney's office has implemented a new procedure for requesting discovery. So whenever we have a criminal filing on a report, the either the district attorney or the defense side will ask for all evidence and everything that goes with it. The new process that they have implemented requires us to produce an intensive amount of audio, video, photos, and reports earlier in the process than it may have been asked for previously. Right now, we're averaging about 70 of those requests per month. So again, it's a heavy workload for a very limited staff. Next slide. Looking at staffing, we're doing a lot better here than we did as I gave this presentation over the last 2 years. What we call our effective staffing is the number of staff that are available to work and cover patrol and dispatch as we sit here today. And that number is 15 on patrol, 5 in dispatch. As I presented in 2022 and 23, the numbers were 11 and 12 respectively. So again, we're doing better as we sit here today, but I'll touch on that a little bit more as we move forward. Next slide. So response times, police departments can often be assessed on how good they are with how quickly they respond to a call for service. As you can see here, overall, all calls for service, which is every call coming in, the response time has crept up a little bit. We're at about 5 minutes average response time for all calls for service. But I do want to note that the priority one, which is those calls that require an immediate police response, they're the life's in danger, something is in progress happening now, we want the police here. We had another reduction last year to just under 3 minutes for the average response time. Next slide. So our total incidents, and they're broken down into officer-initiated incidents. Those are incidents where an officer is out on patrol and they see something that they're going to act on. It could be a traffic stop. It could be something suspicious. It could just be a community policing opportunity talking to kids at a park. The other side is calls for service, which are where the public calls us asking for a response. If you look at those are the blue ones. If you look at those have been creeping up over the years. And last year we held relatively flat, ticked down just a little bit by about 300 calls for service, or one a day. But you'll notice our officer-initiated incidents were up significantly over the year before. And again, that goes back to those traffic stops I was talking about, having more officers, that effective staffing number being higher than it was. There's more officers out there doing that police work. Therefore, those numbers are higher. Next slide. Now, if we break down those calls for service into what is really happening with those, because those are obviously big numbers, and what do they mean? This breaks down to what those major categories were over the last year. Alarms, suspicious activity, disturbances, thefts are all up there. As you can see, most of them are trending somewhat down last year, with the exception of 911 calls. Those are up. And why? I don't have a good answer for that. Our dispatch center is a full-fledged 911 dispatch center. We get landlines, cellular calls. So 911 calls that generate from the freeway often can hit our dispatch center before they're routed to CHP. They could be tied to some medical aids, things along those lines. But as we look at those numbers, it's only about 25 higher than last year too. So still not statistically significant. But I would note that disturbances and suspicious activity calls are down. Next slide. So taking it to another layer are crime rates. Crime rates are based on what are reported crimes to us, not just the incidents that are being generated, but an official police report of a crime that has occurred. And these are the major categories that are reported under the Uniform Crime Reports and now under the National Incident-Based Reporting System. 2021 is an asterisk. Again, as a reminder, there was a transition in September of 21. So as we look at this slide, it's really hard to look at anything prior to 2022 and compare it to today, because they're two different reporting systems and how they're categorized, but it's still worth taking a look at the overall longevity. And again, as you can see here, the overall trend, most things are down. I believe that's burglary is a slight tick up. Let's go ahead and go to the next slide. This breaks it down into different categories of crime, looking at reporting under National Incident-Based Reporting System. And this system is really good for reporting crime, unlike the old system, because it looks at all crime, not just one in a series. So if we took a report that had 4 different reported crimes in it, the old classification way, only the top highest category would be captured. So as we break it down here, again, things are relatively flat, except crimes against society has an uptick, and which also drives the total Group A offenses. In Group A's arson, assault, bribery, burglary, counterfeit, vandalism, drug offenses, embezzlement, extortion, frauds, homicide, and the list continues to go. So it's your major types of crime. Crimes against society, a lot of that is driven by an increase in weapons violations. Last year, we saw about a 60% increase in weapons violations in the city, and that's both with firearm and illegal knife possessions. And we also saw about a 35% increase in possession of drug paraphernalia offenses. Those are both categorized under the crimes against society. Property crime, I'm happy to report that thefts are down again for the 2nd year in a row. But the number there for crimes against property total is up, largely driven to vandalism. If you'll recall, we've had several instances of serial vandals in the city, generally gang related. In fact, we had several places tagged over the weekend, just this last weekend. Each location of those is categorized as a separate offense. So if we have 10 or 15 places hit in one night, it's captured as 10 or 15 different crimes. So that is largely driving that piece. Next slide, please. So as we break this down, what does it mean and what are we seeing trends-wise? Again, weapon offenses are up, drug-related offenses are up, and gang-related incidents. And again, those are largely driven by the vandalism, but we also had several serious assaults over the summer and early summer that were gang-related. Continuing to see larceny and thefts go down. Overall assaults were down and our domestic-related incidents were down. Next slide. This is a quick slide just to kind of show the number of uses of force and pursuits the department had in the last year. Numbers are down over the previous year. Again, they're relatively small numbers as you look at the overall number of arrests and total number of incidents the department is handling there. Next slide. As mentioned in prior years, the department complies with the Racial Identity and Profiling Act, which has been on the books for several years. This is the 3rd year that the department has reported to the state, although we have been collecting the data since 2020. There's a few things to point out about this data. First, it's based on the officer's initial perception of the contact or when they first saw the person. It's not necessarily how someone identifies. Second, we can't simply just compare the data presented here or collected to Healdsburg demographic data. We know the workforce doesn't necessarily live in town. We're located along 101, which is a major thoroughfare to the north, and we have a large number of people vacationing here. All of those factors conflate our demographics versus the people we're coming in contact with. And I will note that for the purposes of this legislation, a stop is not a traffic stop. It's any time that an officer comes into contact with someone and that person is not necessarily free to leave. So traffic stops, contacts because of crime occurred. Next slide. This just breaks down the perceived race of the individuals, and as a note that race is known in less than 2% of the contacts prior to the stop, with 53% white, about 40% Latinx. Next slide. So we look at gender, about 3/4 of those that we're stopping under this are male and 1/4 being female. Next slide. The data breaks it down by stop violations, equipment violations. So it could be brake lights, headlights, equipment violations. Equipment violations being headlights, brake lights. Non-moving violations are things like registration, moving violations, speeding, etc. Non-moving violation would also encompass all those other criminal contacts that are not traffic stops. Next slide. And this slide highlights what a result of those stops are. As you can see, 71% result in warnings, and that's largely driven by the traffic stops. Our goal is to educate and change driving behaviors. It's not to punish people for poor driving. However, if people do get stopped multiple times for the same poor driving behavior, they are likely to end up over there where it says citation for an infraction. Next slide. Just want to talk about our core policing team, our community-oriented and equity policing. Again, as reported over the last couple years, with our staffing, we have not been able to fill the police officer side of this team. So our LMFT has been responding as a solo clinician over the last year, and we're still continuing to see some great success with it. As you can see, he handled almost 1,000 calls for service. Most of those were as a solo clinician response, and again, a majority of those contacts were proactive contacts, going out, making contact with people either experiencing mental health issues, homelessness, offering services, and just trying to get to some root causes and help them along. Next slide. So as part of the consent calendar tonight is the update to our military equipment policy. This was enacted in 2022 that requires that annual review. As part of this, the department possesses 3 categories: drones, 38 and 40 millimeter munition launchers, their associated munitions, which are all used for less lethal applications. Of all these, only a drone was deployed in the last year. Most of those flights were training related. In addition, we had 2 in support of tactical operations and 1 for searching for a suspect. Next slide. Emergency management is housed within the police department. Again, we updated the emergency operations plan, but in addition to that, the continuity of operations plan and family reunification plan were created this year. There's ongoing staff training. All emergency management staff are meeting about quarterly. Training varies each quarter on that, but trying to make sure everyone stays proficient and up to date on city's preparedness and readiness. And then we had a few responses mainly tied to atmospheric rivers over the winter, but we also had a heat event over the 4th of July with the red flag in there as well. Next slide. Community engagement. We have some great photos up there this year. Again, this is just a highlight of some of the work that we're doing. We're continuing to try and increase the number and variety of engagement events that we're out there doing. Again, this is just a sampling of those. One of the things that we're doing, which is not new to policing, but it's new to our department, is Coffee with a Cop. We had our first one last fall. It's really just a way for us to go into coffee shops that invite us in, kind of leverage the in and out of people coming in, not take those opportunities to talk to people. I believe we're working on having another one coming up in the next few weeks at another coffee shop. And our plan is to rotate those around town to the various different coffee providers and hit different groups of people. Next slide.
Want to give you all a quick update on our automated license plate reader system. It's been in effect since late January of 23 with 11 cameras covering ingress and egress points. Right now, they're averaging just under 700,000 unique reads per month, which is quite a bit. And then we're also averaging about anywhere from 70 to 100 searches per month from our staff in investigation of crimes and incidents. And I want to caveat that number of 70 to 100. Anytime we change any single parameter within a search for a case, it is a different search. So if we're looking for a black Honda, it's a search. But if now we go, well, maybe it's navy blue, so we're going to broaden that range to blue and black Honda, it's a second search. So anytime there's that differentiation, it does capture another one. Some use cases in addition to just the stolen vehicles coming in to town that are being caught, missing person cases, assault with a deadly weapon, suspect identification, and a commercial burglary. So the assault with a deadly weapon was one of those stabbing incidents that occurred late spring, early summer. And we had information on a suspect vehicle. And we're able to use the system to take that and identify a vehicle coming into town that helped lead us to the identification of a suspect on that case. And then also when they came back into town, we're able to know they came into town so we could effect a traffic stop on them. For the commercial burglary, this is a newer incident, but I think it really highlights well how we're able to leverage the technology. We had a business broken into in the early morning hours. They didn't have cameras at their business, but a neighboring business did. The neighboring business was across the street, shows the vehicle pulling up in front, someone getting out, using a hammer to break in through a glass door. But the camera quality is not good enough to make out any more than the type of vehicle that it is. We were able to take that, and due to their proximity to one of our cameras, they left the parking lot of the business. 15 seconds later, that same vehicle went by one of the ALPR cameras, led us to identifying that vehicle, and eventually we're able to get an allied agency to make a traffic stop on it down in the Bay Area. Next slide. So lately we've been receiving more questions about immigration enforcement, so I wanted to just take a moment to reiterate what our department policy is, and it's pretty clear. We're committed to the equal enforcement of the law and the equal service of all community members. Trust between law enforcement and the community is essential for effective policing. We need people to trust us, to come to us, to call us to report crime that is occurring. So when individuals fear that calling the police could lead to questions about their immigration status or potential deportation, crimes will go unreported. Cooperation, investigation wanes, and public safety suffers. So to that end, and in compliance with state law, our department does not make inquiries about immigration status. We do not engage in immigration enforcement, and we do not detain solely on federal immigration violations. Next slide. And as we look ahead, I'm talking about recruitments. As I said towards the beginning of the presentation, we're doing better today as we sit here. Our effective staffing number is 15 with a authorized staffing of 18. I do know of some vacancies that are coming, and as we get closer into the summer, that effective staffing number is going to dip. I don't think it's going to dip as low as it was at that 11 number. So it's something that we are aware of. We're working to have recruitments in place, attract high caliber candidates. And at the same time, we are limited in our capacity based on the police academy and what we can put through at any one point. So again, we're going to be watching that. We're going to work to fill these vacancies as quickly as possible, but it is going to take some time to get us up to that fully authorized strength. And then as our staffing allows, we're going to have an emphasis on training to build skills. I was looking at our average tenure for police officers. As you know, we've done a lot of recruitment, a lot of hiring over the last couple of years. And right now we're at about 3.5 years is our average tenure for police officers. So there's going to be a heavy emphasis on continuing to build those knowledge bases and skill sets. On the emergency preparedness side, preparedness never ends. It is a continual evaluation of what we can do to make sure that the city and the residents are ready to respond to any emergency. We're always looking again to continue community outreach on emergency preparedness, making sure people are informed and they feel comfortable that they're ready to respond. And finally, technology. We're always looking for ways in which we can leverage technology to help us better do our jobs and enhance public safety and our investigations. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Thank you, Chief Jenkins, and thank you for the great work you're doing and your staff is doing as well. It's really appreciated.
Thank you.
Do we have questions? Councilmember Edwards?
I wanted to congratulate you on the excellent arrest on that graffiti. Very quick. I mean, you were almost quicker than social media was talking about it. You had a suspect that you released. And what's nice about that is that both in Sonoma County and Mendocino County, where one of the suspects came, it made the newspaper. So people are aware that we are on top of graffiti here.
Yes. And I can't take credit for that. I was home asleep. Great work by our officers. But also I want to emphasize that happened because a community member trusted us and reached out and called and reported what they were seeing. And in those cases, it's really vital to have people, when they see something, to pick up that phone and call us. Because without that, we probably wouldn't have caught them that night. So.
Good. And then I just wanted to clarify that, you know, I did receive an email a while ago about ALPCs being hacked. And that was a Motorola, a different system than we use, correct?
Correct.
Okay, on that one. And then on the gun arrest, are you still seeing, last time you gave us a report, you had the concerns around ghost guns. Are those still an issue that's continuing?
Yeah, but most of the ones that we are recovering are still either unserialized or personally manufactured firearms. I would say more than half of those gun violations are for those.
And then on the alarms, are those residential, business? How's the mix on that?
I don't have a breakdown. As we categorize them, it is just one call type. We would have to try and parse out
and
locations. Yeah.
I guess what I'm trying to get is at, do we have a clear policy on if there's so many alarms at so many places, there's a charge that it occurs?
Yeah, we do have a false alarm ordinance in the city. Fourth false alarm in a calendar year starts to trigger bill collection and fines with it.
And then back to the automatic license plate readers, how is that working? In other words, are we having incidences of where a wrong vehicle is identified, or is that system pretty accurate?
So the general threshold that the system uses is about a 75% confidence in reading, and then it'll trigger an alert to us. We confirm them as they come in, then we take a look at those license plates and the image that's sent to see if we see it differently than the computer's reading it. So there's a mix. We'll get alerts that this is a plate. We look at it and go, no, the 8's a D, and it's a worn license plate or a bad angle. And then no one responds.
So we've still got a set of eyes that are actually looking at that before?
Every time.
Okay. Yep. Great on that. Thank you very much. Very good report. One last thing. I remember you saying earlier when you did your military meeting
Yes.
for the public what was the attendance of that?
Last year, I believe there were 3.
Okay.
The year before that, I sat in a room by myself.
Okay. So yes, the public, if you are concerned about that, our chief does do a presentation every year, publishes that, so you are able to get in that. And one last thing, on the drone that we lost, was that the USA or just the ANAFI version?
That was just the ANAFI version.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you. So you outlined a number of different new technologies that you're working with, and I think that's part of the success that you reported on tonight. So I'm glad to see that it's implemented. But do you feel like you're getting the support in terms of evaluating the security of those systems, and especially with regards to people's civil rights and privacy and so on? It seems like a lot is maybe on your shoulders with that. Do you feel like you need more support in order to make sure that those systems are secure?
So anytime we look at a platform, we're lockstep with information technology in the city. We're in talking with them as far as the security side of it goes, making sure they're comfortable from their side. It's something that I'm acutely aware of, and I'm looking at how they're storing the data and whether we feel comfortable with it or not. So I think we're in a good spot with all of that.
Okay, thank you. You reported that there are fewer collisions. Is there anything that you could say about why that is?
I'm hoping it's due to the increased traffic enforcement and people slowing down and paying better attention. I can't tell you right now. I'm hoping to see that it's a trend that continues, and then we'll be able to glean some more information from it at that point.
Okay. You said you had 781 arrests, which was up, and I see that as an indication of more successful work on your part. Is there anything more you can add to sort of illustrate that statistic to us?
In what regard are you looking for? I can probably add a lot of different context.
Well, yeah, I mean, this may be an opportunity to pat yourself on the back. It's good if you're catching bad guys, right? And so, is it a reflection in your mind on the culture of the city, or the quality of work from your staff, or anything along those lines that comes to mind?
Yeah, it goes back to the beginning. I said it's really good quality police work that the staff's doing. They're out there, they are working hard to investigate crimes that are reported, but also being proactive and looking for things happening that result in some of these arrests, whether it's the weapons violations, because that's where a lot of those are coming from, is those proactive contacts. And as a resident of the city, and a father of teenage daughters in town, that's what I would want them to be doing, is making sure that the streets are as safe as possible for them to be out there. And I feel that they're doing that.
Yeah, me too. That's great. So I assume that's part of why we're seeing an increase in the firearm arrests. I mean, it sounds to me like people are pulling over the right people in the right circumstances in order to find these. It's not always a car, right? But to find these drugs and weapons and so on. Unless you have anything else to add to that, it seems like to be part of the same positive profile there, that you're getting your job done. Related also, in decrease in priority response time, that seems to tick down a little bit every year. And so what are you doing to make that happen?
I think we're going to get to a point where that number is not going to go down anymore. When we're looking at a 3-minute response time, we're going to hit a point where we can't get it any lower. I think last year it went lower from the other 2 years because we had some more bodies able to respond. And any time that we have more bodies out there, someone is more likely than not going to be closer than someone else, which helps reduce that time. But again, we're at a marginal point here where I wouldn't be surprised if that number holds steady or ticks up.
Sure. It's really great to hear such a great report. And I think, public safety is immensely important. It's a big responsibility for this council and, of course, for you. And so thank you very much. It's a great place to be in. And I think our citizens are grateful for the amount of safety they feel living in Healdsburg.
Thank you.
Thank you again, Chief Jenkins. It's really wonderful. And I echo Vice Mayor's comments, especially about the reduced timing on the priority one. That's pretty amazing. I guess I just have one. Do you have concerns about that? Or are you feeling like you're getting kind of ahead of it at some level?
We are trying to stay ahead of it as far as we can, and we'll keep chugging away at that.
Okay, yeah. That's a problem, of course, for so many other businesses, people. But yeah, thank you for that.
Thank
Thank you
you.
for your report. Oh, and Councilmember Hagley.
I did notice the picture from the fair
Yeah,
was not of us trying to steer the kids' pigs.
that was a strategic choice.
I appreciate that.
Not a
Thank you.
problem.
Okay, so thank you. So now, oh, we have a double city manager's report from last time, right?
All of my good updates from last time might be lost to history, so I'll just give you a fresh one this evening. But I do have just a couple of things to update on. First up, we have had a bit of a slow winter pause in our event calendar, but that will be changing soon. So just a reminder, 2 weeks from today is St. Patrick's Day. I'm sure I'm not the only one in this room a little bit chagrined that that's the same day as a city council meeting. Nevertheless, I know we'll all be out there bright and early. I think sunrise is somewhere around 7:10, 7:15 that morning. So we'll be out for the short parade and festivities, and there'll be some additional fun throughout that day. So we'll have some more information out, of course, but mark your calendars, get your green ready, and we'll see you all in 2 weeks for that event. Couple of other things to mention really quickly. One is the chief mentioned this as part of his report. Just one of the many details in there is their ongoing engagement with interns. And they've been doing that for a number of years. I think both of our public safety departments have been doing that. But I wanted to highlight, it's on my mind this week. Many of us will be at Healdsburg High School this Wednesday evening watching presentations by the student interns who completed their projects this year. And we actually took in, and this has been notably different in the last 2 years, we took in 12 interns from the high school as part of the city operation this year. So that includes police and fire for sure, but also IT. We had a number of folks interested in computers and programming and spent time with our IT staff, utilities as well. And I think there were 1 or 2 other departments that participated. And that's an intentional and notable change from just having a couple of departments participate. We saw an opportunity a couple of years ago to get more involved in that program, where many of our businesses take in interns every year and take part in that to try to build some stronger connections with the high school, with young people, just because it's important to have those connections as a city, but also, and the chief alluded to this, it gets harder and harder to recruit people to the kind of work we do and to public service in general. And if we can just plant little seeds with high school juniors, the hope is that some of those might come back and see us in a few years and have an interest in taking on any number of different jobs that are available with the city. So we try to build that engagement. I actually was able to spend some time with our interns a couple of months ago in this room when they came to kick off their experience. And I asked the group how many had ever been to City Hall before, and 1 said yes. So that was interesting, eye-opening, but a little troubling to me too. So my hope is we'll create more opportunities where more young people might see fit to come and spend some time with us. So that's part of a journey, but I did just want to highlight that that's something we've been working on here at City Hall, and I think we're making progress on. And then lastly, just one more calendar update. We heard from the police department tonight, but we do annual reports from both police and fire. If you can't wait until next month for the fire department update, I believe Chief Boaz will be the guest speaker at the Chamber of Commerce's Good Morning Healdsburg this Thursday. So I'll pitch that for good attendance, but we will have another update in this room at one of our meetings next month will be the fire department update. Thanks.
Thank you. Anybody have questions for the city manager? No? Okay, so thank you for that. We'll go on to public comment on items on the consent calendar and non-agenda items. This time is set aside to receive comments from the public regarding matters of general interest, not on the agenda, but related to city council business. Pursuant to the Brown Act, however, the city council cannot consider any issues or take action on any request during this comment period. Do we have anybody who would like to do general public comment? Not seeing anyone.
This is the open mic portion.
Yeah, general, not on the agenda.
Good evening, Pete Segazio. I live at 3220 Pasalacqua and I take Passalacqua Road to get to Hillsburg Avenue. And if there's no sidewalk, then jaywalking is legal, I think. I looked it up online. I don't know, but until there is a sidewalk on Sunday mornings, you really should spend time on Passalacqua Road, because there's a lot of people on the road. There's no posted speed limit. My car flashes 25. I've driven faster, and I had a yelling match with a person because, I was driving too fast. And I said, well, you're on the street. And so it's just kind of confusing. Can they be on the street legally? And is there legal requirements for us to be so many feet away from someone that's jaywalking? And there is no posted speed limits on that road. So something bad's going to happen at some point. And even after the trail goes in, it's still it's something you should look at. I know I brought it up before, but everybody jaywalks, and I don't know if that's legal. I don't know. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else with a comment? Nobody? Do we want to try to answer those questions, or is that, no, not at this point? Okay. So we'll, I'll bring it back and go for a motion for the consent, to approve the consent calendar.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Okay, that passes. So now we'll move on to public hearings. The Saggio Hills Affordable Housing Project conducted Tax Equity and Fiscal Responsibility Act public hearing and adopt a resolution approving the issuance of up to $30 million in tax-exempt bonds through the California Municipal Finance Authority to finance or refinance the Saggio Hills project. Housing Director Stephen Sotomayor. Thank you.
Good evening, Madam Mayor, members of the council. Stephen Sotomayor, Housing Director. The item before you today is a TEFRA public hearing for Saggio Hills. Next slide, please. So the action requested today is to conduct a Tax Equity and Fiscal Responsibility Act, which is what TEFRA stands for, public hearing, and to adopt a resolution approving the issuance of up to $30 million in tax-exempt bonds to the California Municipal Finance Authority to finance or refinance the Saggio Hills project. Next slide, please. Just some general notes about a TEFRA hearing, and I'm joined today by both Robin Zimbler, who is joining us virtually, and also from Mr. Suzuki, who is from the California Municipal Finance Authority, in case we have any questions. But I'll go through really quick what this means. The Freebird Development Company is using tax-exempt bonds to finance the Saggio Hills Affordable Housing Project Phase 1. As a part of that, they were given an award through CIDLAC and now are going through the California Municipal Finance Authority to issue bonds in an amount up to $30 million. This is done as part of a statute requirement under Section 147F of the Internal Revenue Code, which requires the jurisdiction in which the tax-exempt bonds are being issued to hold a public hearing and to receive public comment is a part of that issuance. This adoption of the resolution does not obligate the city to provide any financing or make contributions to the projects. The bonds that are issued through CFMA will be the sole responsibility of the developer, Freebird Development Company. And it does not obligate us to any future approval actions that the project's development agreement or any other pending items. This is solely to hear a public hearing around the issuance of these bonds. Next slide, please. And just some really quick key points is that back in, we entered into an exclusive negotiating agreement with Freebird for the development of Saggio Hills. This TEFRA hearing is related to the phase 1 of that development, which will bring us 48 units, 47 of which will be deed restricted. We have a disposition and development agreement that was completed in April of 2023. And these units will be serving households earning between 30 and 60% of the area median income. And this represents a portion of the total project of the Saggio Hills development, which has a total of 118 units as part of that. As part of the other funding that's included in this that will be complemented by the bonds is, as the council's been informed, this project was awarded a very competitive grant under the Affordable Housing Sustainable Communities program that fund that gave a $21.1 million award. 15.3 of that will go towards the affordable housing and 5.2 million will go to other improvements such as transit, trail development, along with other improvements to public sidewalks and other items that were under that grant to improve our greenhouse gas reduction footprint. And just as a final reminder, the project will seek an additional $1 million from Measure S as part of this total capital stack, and staff anticipates to bring that back before the City Council in April 7th. And that would allow the project to move forward this spring or early summer with construction. Next slide, please. And so today is largely to hold this tougher hearing to allow the issuance of these bonds. I do have representatives from both Freebird and the California Municipal Finance Authority in case there's any other questions. But with that, that concludes my presentation.
Thank you very much. Does council have questions for Director Sotomayor? No. So we'll open the public hearing and open it to public comment. Not seeing anybody rush to the podium. We'll close the public hearing. Like doing that. And so you're looking for
So we will need a adoption of the resolution.
Okay. Ron?
I move that we adopt the resolution for the TFRA hearing.
Is that enough?
If I may clarify for the record, you guys will adopt a resolution approving the issuance of up to 30 million in tax-exempt bonds through the California Municipal Finance Authority to finance or refinance the Saggio Hills project.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Can we have a roll call vote, please? Do we need more?
Councilmember Edwards, was that your motion?
Yes, that was
Thank
my
you.
motion.
So we have a motion and a second. Roll call, please.
Councilmember Edwards.
Yes.
Councilmember Higley.
Yes.
Vice Mayor Harrod.
Yes.
Mayor Mitchell.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you, Stephen. And now the public hearing revisions to the Healdsburg Municipal Code Title 20 Land Use Code regarding formula businesses downtown and prohibiting big box retail and outlet malls throughout the city. Senior Planner Ellen McDowell and I see Scott Dugan. Welcome back. Nice to see you. Yeah.
Good evening, Mayor Mitchell and council members. I'm Ellen McDowell with the Community Development Division. Next slide, please. The purpose of this evening's meeting is to review draft revisions to the Healdsburg Municipal Code Title 20 Land Use Code, hold a public hearing, and by motion introduce for first reading by title only, an ordinance amending the land use code to revise and clarify sections related to formula businesses and to prohibit big box retail and outlet malls throughout the city. Next slide, please. I'll just go over these quickly, and if you want me to stop, let me know. But the general plan policies that currently apply to formula businesses in Healdsburg are LUD 5 that says that formula businesses are prohibited on properties around the historic plaza in order to preserve its character of small, unique businesses that are attractive to residents and visitors. LUE 1, big box retail and outlet malls are prohibited within the city of Healdsburg. And EDB 3, formula businesses shall be prohibited on properties around the plaza in order to support local and independently owned businesses and protect and enhance Healdsburg's unique character. These policies have been enforced as applying to businesses that are facing the Healdsburg Plaza. Next slide, please. General plan implementation measures shown here show that the land use code should be amended to regulate formula businesses for properties around the plaza and prohibit big box retail and outlet malls throughout the city. And also to ED 12 to prohibit formula businesses on properties around the plaza. Staff is proposing to address these implementation measures in the ordinance before you this evening. Next slide, please. We currently have definitions for formula business, big box retail, and outlet malls that are within our general plan. Staff is proposing to incorporate definitions for formula retail, big box stores, and outlet malls within the land use code to provide for better clarity and to provide consistency amongst the general plan and the land use code. Next slide, please. For a little background, we met on August 19th, 2024, and the City Council received a presentation from staff and directed staff to return with policy options and draft language for formula businesses in the downtown area. And then on December 2nd, 2024, the council discussed formula businesses, heard input from the public, and provided direction to staff to prepare an ordinance in the plaza retail and downtown commercial zoning districts up to North Street, and that these regulations should apply to both sides of North Street and prohibit big box retail and outlet malls throughout the city. Next slide, please. Staff prepared the ordinance, and our proposed definition for formula retail would be a retail business which is required by contractual or other arrangement or affiliation to maintain a standardized formula, array of services and or merchandise, menu, employee uniforms, decor, facade design, signage, color scheme, trademark, or service mark, name or similar standardized features in which causes it to be substantially similar to 10 or more retail businesses or restaurants in the United States, regardless of ownership or location at the time the business license was approved. Based on the feedback from council in December, staff has structured this definition to include 10 or more retail stores across the United States. Next slide, please. The proposed definition will include 7 sub-definitions. These sub-definitions seek to clarify what an array of merchandise, color scheme, decor, facade, service mark, trademark, or uniform apparel are. The definition this evening is similar to other cities throughout California that have formula retail ordinances. Next slide, please. The formula retail boundary, as shown here, depicts the proposed boundary that we discussed at council in December and now includes both sides of North Street. The boundary still includes the plaza retail as well as downtown commercial retail district 1 block off the plaza and both sides of North Street. Next slide, please. The recommended land use code changes are all redlined in attachments 1 and 2, and they included in the ordinance is the intent to clarify the intent of the downtown's role as the city commercial core and the city's intent to promote a variety of retail businesses. We seek to clarify the areas within which formula retail is prohibited and where it is allowed. We propose to update the definitions to include definitions for formula retail, big box retail, and outlet malls. We will update the use tables to prohibit big box retail and outlet malls throughout the city, and update the use tables to include formula retail and establish where it is permitted, not permitted, and would be allowed with a CUP. And we would add a new section for formula business. Next slide, please. The ordinance before you as attachment 1 this evening includes a new land use code section that will address formula retail by adding a purpose, definition, exceptions, an approval process, and findings for formula retail that would be subject to a conditional use permit. The exception sections would include exceptions for businesses that currently have a business license within the area and would allow for a conditional use permit process for a business that serves an unmet need within the community. Findings have been added to ensure compatibility with the area. This section would also include a clarification that a conditional use permit shall lapse within 6 months if a business were to vacate a space. This would make it so either a new use could operate under the same conditional use permit if they were able to show that they could operate under the previously conditioned use within 6 months' time. If nothing is applied for within 6 months, the conditional use permit would be invalid and a new conditional use permit would need to be applied for that space. Next slide, please. The Planning Commission heard the project on January 28th, 2025, and discussed 2 recommended changes for the council to consider. One we have incorporated into the ordinance this evening, and that was to change the phrase substantially identical to substantially similar within the proposed formula retail definition. And the second request was that the city attorney's office review the legality of a conditional use permit lapsing after 6 months if the business ceases to operate. The city attorney's office did review this and suggested that it can remain within the ordinance. Some commissioners suggested that the formula retail boundary be extended north to Piper Street and encompass all of the downtown commercial zoning district. And they also discussed concerns with the conditional use permit process and expressed concerns for unintended consequences with that. Next slide, please. This evening, we have 4 alternatives for consideration. The first option this evening is to adopt the ordinance as proposed in Attachment 1. This option includes a conditional use permit process and includes findings for businesses that would meet an unmet need within the community. A conditional use permit is a discretionary process that could unintentionally leave room for interpretation and cause potential legal challenges. And it could also come with some risk that a new business could potentially inherit a conditional use permit that was issued to another business. As drafted, the ordinance preserves the option to let some formula businesses in the southern portion of the downtown commercial district adjacent to the Plaza Retail District if they would serve that unmet need. And next slide, please. I've also prepared an alternate ordinance for you this evening for consideration to show the council what the ordinance might look like without the conditional use permit process. This was discussed at length at the Planning Commission, so we thought offering 2 options might be good. And this option would provide for a cleaner, more predictable implementation. It would have less flexibility and would prohibit formula retail within the proposed boundary without exception. Next slide, please. The final 2 alternatives this evening would be making further revisions to the ordinance, and we would return to the Planning Commission and then come back to the council. The alternate would take some time. We would want to work on categories that could potentially add a level of complexity to an ordinance that may be difficult to implement. And the final alternative would be to continue implementing and enforcing the prohibition on Plaza Retail District only, so only businesses that are facing the plaza. This option would basically maintain the status quo and would not address the concerns that were raised in the community. Next slide, please. The recommended action this evening is to conduct a public hearing and by motion introduced for first reading by title only an ordinance amending Healdsburg Municipal Code Title 20 regarding formula businesses downtown and prohibiting big box retail and outlet malls throughout the city. I'd also like to bring to your attention this evening, there is an error in the ordinance in section 5 of both ordinances this evening. And this section should read that formula retail is permitted within the service commercial district. Next slide, please. And that concludes my presentation this evening.
Thank you for that. Does the council have questions? Councilmember Higley.
On the question about cease to operate, so say a business has a 5-year lease, but they cease to operate before the lease is up, but they're still obligated on that lease. Are you really looking at you know, I mean, the tenant still has to pay rent, has obligations to the landlord. But then potentially, as they're trying to sublease or find another tenant, it goes beyond that 6 months, and then they lose their CUP, but they still have a lease obligation. What's the thought process behind I guess that was the planning commission asked some about the legality of the cease to operate. Maybe you can clarify how that would work if you have a longer lease and you still have an obligation, you're trying to sublease the space, but it takes longer than 6 months. Because there has been space that sat empty for longer than that.
Yeah, so I think it would depend on our business license as well. So generally, we would look and see when they pulled their business license and if they stopped paying for a business license, when that happened. We could also visually see, I suppose, when they vacate a property. And if it comes to our attention that it's been 6 months or longer.
Okay. I'm just curious, like the terminology, is it really a risk that another business inherits a CUP? I mean, risk, like we have a business that, was there and then for whatever reason they leave. It seems like the phrasing is a very negative connotation to our businesses.
If I could jump in, I think the issue is that in order for that business to have located within this area to achieve that CUP, they would have had to prove that they were serving some type of unmet need. So the community really wanted to see that business locate there. The concern is, should that business cease to operate and another business come in that doesn't necessarily meet an unmet need, but is a formula retail business, that you then have that unintended consequence of somebody being able to take advantage of an existing CUP, but not meet that unmet need. And from a planning perspective, we don't monitor leases. We tend to monitor the use themselves. And so if that use were to discontinue for 6 months, then yes, that CUP would lapse. However, another business trying to sublease could certainly do that. They would just be subject to the same rules as everybody else, and they would have to apply for a CUP and prove that they are serving the community and meeting an unmet need. That helps provide a little bit more clarification to your question.
Yeah, I guess.
It may not be the answer you're looking for, but that's how we would handle it.
Vice Mayor?
Just a quick follow-up to that. I mean, in your opinion, what's the likelihood of that scenario occurring? It seems pretty small, in my opinion, from what I've heard from some other folks.
I would say that it is fairly small, but it does happen. I've seen it happen in other communities. But it does happen when people try to use a conditional use permit that's already permitted for that location.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Edwards?
A question kind of back to the definitions. And as this goes on, there's always more thought about it, more things come up. And when we say there's an array or merchandise menu of 50% or more in stock. So my question is around, if I've got a store on the plaza, Ron Shoes, and I carry name brands, Nike, New Balance, Hoka, those type of products, and I decide that I want to sell my business. And maybe a large chain wants to have a boutique store and still keep it as, buy my name out as Ron's Shoes. And they, on their website, then will have Healdsburg is listed as a location for them. How would that situation be affected by this new ordinance? I mean, is it up to the city to have to go in and look at the merchandise and figure out the percentages they have? Is this going to be where other merchants go in and go, aha, they've got 51%? How is that enforced? What is that? Is that a real number, and how is it achieved?
No, that's a very good point. It is really difficult to monitor that type of situation. I think what the formula retail is trying to do is just that. It's trying to ensure that the character of downtown Healdsburg maintains independently owned, unique stores.
it gets really difficult if there's to try and track down ownership, to look at the overall composition of the stock that's in there to know. But I think we try and use a little bit of the common sense principle of, I think what most people think of as a formula retail business are some of those big national chains that clearly have the same menu, they have the same signage, they have the same color and architecture and those sorts of things. And that's what, should those move downtown, would have an impact on the overall sense of independence and uniqueness in terms of stores downtown. This policy, as with any other types of policies, if somebody wants to be there, they're going to try and find ways to work around it. And it just becomes really challenging to enforce. But I do know that the existing definition that we have right now is one sentence. It has a lot of ambiguity to it. And what we're trying to do is try and refine that to provide a little bit more clarity and hopefully lend to better implementation of that policy down the road.
So in other words, we are trying to regulate what the community has asked us to do without micromanaging and having a hall monitor in each store.
True.
All right, thank you.
Also, if I may, if the council adopts the ordinance, it would be enforced like any other ordinance on the books, which is through code enforcement. So if a business went in that fulfilled, that a member of the community or someone else felt like fulfilled the requirements for formula retail, but they were operating anyway in an area without a CUP, for instance, they could report that to the city's code enforcement, and the city could enforce its ordinance.
Okay, that's good. So code enforcement would be the way that would be enforced. All right, thank you.
And let me ask the question. You mentioned that what we have now, and it's been working since what, 2009, and we really have protected the plaza from the 3-sentence description of a formula business. So we've gotten very specific on this new one, which I appreciate, but I would think it'd work even better, but it's already really been working, yes?
I think we have to qualify that it's worked really well for the Plaza Retail District, those that just face the plaza. The concern has been is that the community feels that maybe that's not enough and that we really should be looking into the downtown commercial district or some of that area that's surrounding the Plaza Retail District. And the current policy that's in the general plan, which is the only place it is, we don't have any of this in the zoning code itself, which is what you use to implement your general plan. Has been interpreted to mean just the Plaza Retail District. So this is trying to address that broader area as well, as provide more specificity in the definition.
Right, but the original intent was just the plaza, right? With that in the general plan?
Yeah, in the general plan, and again, it's a general plan, so it's just that. And so it has some general policies which Planner McDowell had put on the screen earlier. It didn't specifically say the Plaza Retail District. I think the Plaza Retail District was created recognizing that it's a unique area to help implement policies such as that. But it's not specific enough to clearly say that that's the case. But that is how it's been implemented. When this ordinance was going to come before the council several years back, I think it was in 2011, the recommendation then was similar, that it would be, and that was by the Planning Commission at the time, that it applied to the Plaza Retail District only.
Great, thank you. If there are no other questions from council, we'll go ahead and open this public hearing. Welcome.
Good evening, Mayor Mitchell and council members. I'm Jonathan Perlman, live on Matheson Street. While I agree with the general principles of the legislation, I'm unclear on why the demarked area is limited to only part of the downtown commercial district. The exclusion of any formula business from streets facing the plaza makes sense, and the requirement for conditional use permit for areas beyond the plaza also makes sense. However, stopping this zone at North Street is ignoring future development that is happening north of North. The old Raven movie theater has been leased for 25 years to the Vertice Hospitality Group, and it's anticipated that this space will be converted into a destination food event center. Once that opens, it is certain to extend the experience of the downtown for tourists and locals alike. Further to the north along Center Street. At that point, it is likely that more businesses will want to locate in that area, and there may very well be a formula business, like Starbucks, for instance, that will want to be there. Without the requirement for a CU in that area, a Starbucks or Pete's Coffee could significantly affect both the Flying Goat location and Black Oak Coffee. Spaces like the Digital Express, Bank of Marin, other spaces in the Mitchell Center, and the Vanguard real estate office across the street are all primed for future opportunities for formula businesses. On Healdsburg Avenue, north of North Street, there are a number of opportunities for formula businesses with spaces that are both large enough and close to existing draws, like Costo Bakery. I'm not advocating for a ban of formula businesses in any area other than at the plaza. Only the requirement of findings for a CU that would require that formula businesses be one that is not already represented in the downtown commercial area and not compete with local homegrown businesses. Given the upscale direction of development of the downtown since the opening of the Hotel Healdsburg in 2001, the next 24 years could see substantial growth to the north with some larger development sites like the Sanderson Ford lot, the city parking lot at 434 Healdsburg Avenue, and the old gas station site at the corner of Healdsburg and Piper. While the Mitchell Center and the Town Center may be stable now, both of those sites are great opportunities for future mixed development. I know there's concern about the fact that there are no objective standards to weigh when considering a conditional use. To me, the job of the Planning Commission and the City Council is to be those discerning bodies that make determinations to both protect local businesses and promote future economic development. If the goal is to protect the integrity and character of the downtown and protect and encourage homegrown and local businesses, then the dividing line at North Street is like the Maginot Line. It'll work temporarily, but soon a formula business will break through. When the first step is made to the north, you know it will be contentious. By requiring that all the downtown commercial district is following the same rules, it makes it more certain that the character of our town is protected for decades to come. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Anyone else? Welcome.
Good evening, Richard Berg. Just a suggestion to test how this ordinance might feel when you had to implement it because someone wants to do something, to look at the formula businesses or semi-formula businesses we have and see whether you would allow them in the district designated for this ordinance. For example, could CVS open a location in the area? Could 7-Eleven open a location in this area? Or Circle K, or as Jonathan mentioned, Starbucks. I think testing the way the conversation would proceed, since you would have discretion, you and the Planning Commission would have discretion, it would be useful to have a conversation about what if, so that you actually know the kinds of resolution and discernment you would have to bring to the task, since it is going to be hard for the unlikely possibility that someone like Copperfield's gets 5 more locations and suddenly meets the qualification of a formula business. So that's an exercise. The other thing I'd like to say is that having the overlay to the same as the downtown commercial district makes a lot of sense, rather than having multiple boundaries to be assessed when someone applies for a CUP. If it's one area and the same rules apply to the whole area, there's a lot less chance of surprising neighbors or other business entities in the area. So I suggest uniformity rather than further divisions of how the map and zoning map look. Thank you.
Thank you. Welcome.
Hi, Pete Segazio. We own the building at 404 North Street or Center Street. Just on North. I would like you to consider to pause. We are, last year was a very bad year for us in the grape industry. This year is going to be worse. Hopefully the bottom is next year or the year after that. But I think if you take a poll of all of the merchants, I think they would all say they were off 10% last year. And I don't know that this year is going to be any better. But we are looking at a generational change in wine consumption. And a lot of people I respect feel that there's another 20, 25, 30% adjustment yet to come. So right now, the Summit Bank put out their annual piece, and they say that 10% of all the grapes in the state have to come out to equalize supply. But if the number is 20% or 30%, what is that going to mean for our local tourism? You know, at the end of the day, this town was built because of wine tourism. And the future of tourism may be not what we may have hit our peak. We may have gotten as good as we're going to get. And I know that Plaza, I was totally fine with this ordinance when it was for the Plaza, because the Plaza is where all the tourists go. They're all going to make that loop. You pay dearly as a landlord, you pay dearly as a business to be on the Plaza. But rent drops off dramatically when you're 1 block, 2 blocks north. I mean, I know when people at a couple of the shops, you listen to their count and you look at my count, I'm 1/4 of the count that they get on the Plaza. So if you're, and look, I don't want the big boxes and the chains or the big box stores and outlet malls. I don't want that. I want to preserve what we have. But I'm concerned that if business is going to tank, like it is for those of us in the wine industry, what is that going to do for the merchants? And if you have this restrictive policy for the whole town, or I didn't think, I'd like it to not be at our building. I'd like you to stop at North. But are you going to have enough local businesses that can support in a tough economic environment if wine consumption stays low? Are you going to get these spots filled? You know, are the local businesses going to be strong enough? Are they going to have deep enough pockets to put in a great store in these places that are 2, 3, 4 blocks off the Plaza? So that's, you know, we haven't seen the worst of this storm. And you don't want to enact something if we're going to go into a recession and into a significant storm that's going to change the face of the industry. And then lastly, Charlie Palmer's, if somebody like Charlie Palmer has Charlie Palmer Steak Reno, Steak Napa, Dry Creek Kitchen, so it's a different name. would that be considered a chain, or since those are individual properties by Charlie, different names? So I was curious about that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Eric Drew, 131 Grant Street here in Healdsburg. I've been a resident and a real estate broker for 50 years. In Healdsburg, I've done a lot of commercial property. I applaud what you're doing for one main purpose, is that you're giving public exposure to the city's desire to maintain a small town character and encourage the small businesses. I'm concerned a lot on what you're doing is you're creating some friction where what you're talking about is all small businesses that mean typically 1,000 to 2,000, maybe 3,000 square foot of space. And you're creating friction where the people that are able to deal with the processes that you're putting in place are the big guys. The people with out-of-town staff to jump through all the hoops. The mom and pop that are trying to create their passion project, their little place, are going to have a problem jumping through all the hoops and knowing just how they fit. Now, we can tell them, oh, you don't have to worry, you don't qualify, but that's kind of not the way it goes. There's other aspects of creating excessive friction in this, and that's the unintended consequences of if somebody wants to build a new building where Bank of America is now, for instance, and they need an anchor tenant in order to get financing. Their anchor tenant might not qualify. You know, Merritt Sher, when I handled the land transaction for Merritt Sher, his whole concept, he'd never done hotels before, hospitality. His whole concept was to create a anchor tenant for a shopping center. He was in the shopping center business. An anchor tenant for a shopping center called Healdsburg, and he created that. But I think you're going to be really talking about unintended consequences of how does somebody get their project financed when Bank of America leaves town and wants to put something there, or or the auto dealership, or a number of things. But that's actually not what I wanted to talk about here. What I really wanted to talk about isn't how we can prevent people from coming in. How can we help the people that are here right now? And one of the things that I realized is that, we talk about shop local, but that's really all about tax dollars into the local coffers. I couldn't find anything that really referenced who are these local businesses? What are they? So I made a list of them, and I was going to give it to you. I count 100 local businesses that have storefronts in commercial districts in Healdsburg. And my challenge to you and to the community is, how do you help them? I'm way less concerned about how we keep other people out. I'm a lot more concerned about how we help the ones that are already here. I made a list of 100 of them. It's not complete, but I've listed the name of the business and the name of the owner. I'm going to expand it to the address of the property and a contact. And I just wanted to ask you to spend as much energy as you're spending keeping people out as helping these people that are already here. What can you do to help them?
Thank you. Anyone else wish to speak on this topic? Welcome.
Bruce Abramson here, Healdsburg. I had quite a list of things to say, but I support Mr. Perlman's approach and the data and the information he provided you. I'd just be repeating a lot of what he said, and so I kind of I support his position. I hope you will expand the CU to Piper Street rather than north, and give the opportunity to really examine everything. One thing you're doing here is that you're allowing formula businesses in all the other districts, in the service commercial, in the mixed use, the Bank of America, all of that. So there is a huge area there that will not have any CU, and any business can move in there. So I hope you will expand that CU to Piper Street.
Thank you. Anyone else? Not seeing anyone. Oh, please. Welcome.
Marilyn Joyce, Healdsburg. I also agree to extend the boundary to Piper Street. And to Eric Drew's question of how we can help the existing 100 local businesses, I know I'm speaking out of turn, but it seems like what we need to do is pull together, and the landlords need to look at the business environment and lower their expectations and their rents, because there is quite a bit of difference if you're on the plaza, and it puts a lot of pressure on a small business to survive. So that's my comment.
Thank you. Anyone else? Not seeing anyone come forward, so we'll close the public hearing. Bring it back to council for comments and or questions and or comments. Anybody have anything they'd like to say? Not yet. Vice Mayor?
Yeah, I can go first. See where to start here. I think that the CUP component in the ordinance is critically necessary. I'm glad to see that it's there in the language that supports it, and I think it adequately answers some or most of the concerns that Mr. Segatio brought up in terms of, we need flexibility in order to allow businesses to come in that the ordinance would normally exclude. And yeah, I think it does that enough. And so for me, in terms of what we finish up with, it all hinges on that. Because as he mentioned, and which is apparent to everybody, change is really the only constant in any economic environment. And 5 years, 10 years, 50 years. And so I think we always need to be flexible enough to accommodate changes when they happen. But I think if we have that, we are in a good position to strengthen this ordinance in the ways that was brought up by Mr. Perlman, Mr. Berg, and Mr. Abramson. And I think this was my position earlier when we discussed this. I think that we should include the whole CD district in this ordinance. I think, I'm willing to go over the arguments that steered the council away from that at our last meeting, but I think it really had to do with concerns about some of the properties north of North Street really being suitable for a local business. And, my hope is that the CUP process addresses that. So that's what I'd like to see changed in the ordinance. And I've also had second thoughts about the number of businesses that qualified as a formula business. So we have 10 on the ordinance now, and I think it could be reduced to maybe 8. And so I'd like to have that discussion.
Yeah, I think I wanted to go back to how we came up to this area. And I think we were looking at, we are getting the economic reports. I was at the economic forum. We're seeing where things are going. And I think that we wanted to keep our city nimble enough so that we don't have a lot of empty storefronts. I think that it's going to be very important that we allow, particularly at some of these larger storefronts. I think Mr. Drew said that the average on the plaza is about 1,000 square feet. And if we get outside of these zones, we start getting into larger properties. The Sanderson property, a lot of those are much larger. It was interesting to hear about the anchor tenant process. And I think that we were concerned in looking at really protecting our core downtown of where our walking foot traffic is now, to keep that area concentrated, to keep that downtown a real downtown experience. So expanding it beyond could have detrimental effects to those larger properties, which is what we discussed at the last meeting. Wanting to clear that up. Interesting going to 8. One of the things I've noticed that this council has historically done is pick a number. I mean, is it 5? Is it 10? Is it 8? And it just gets, what is the justification to do that? And I know that it would be easy. I don't think it would be ethical for us to come up with a number to be protectionist. If there is a justification for 8, I'd like to hear it. I could get behind it if there is a real reason other than we just pick this particular number. I know that we ran into the unintentional consequences with the hotels of, okay, we have 5 keys, but now we have suites. My example of kind of quick, shifty ways to get into a location. I mean, at what point do we not leave it in the hands of our departments to go through and judge this, whereas us sitting here micromanaging, do we want to have a hearing for each and every single business that wants to open in town? Is that the purpose of the council? I think our purpose is to set the general tone and tenor of what we want to see and go from that forward, interpreting what the community has asked from us, both residential, business, and landlords. I mean, these are important things. Now, I think that I would like to keep the district as it is, and we discussed at the last meeting.
Thank you. Councilmember Higley, are you?
Still taking notes.
Yeah, you want me to go first?
Sure.
Yeah, I'm happy to. Thank you both of your comments and from all the public comment. We've really sort of almost beat this thing to death at this point, I think. And I do agree that the 8 just seems sort of random at this point. Like we did that with hotels, we did that with, a lot of different things. So the 10 has been discussed. We've received public comment at a number of meetings. It was based on, I believe, what's in the Plaza Now and the Copperfields. Is that true? That they have, I mean, there was a basis for 10 or more from that. So I don't want to change that number now. I also don't want to, I do not agree. I have a hard time with this ordinance in general because I'm not really fond of limiting businesses in this way. And I do want to protect our small town charm and all of those things. But I heard a lot at the Planning Commission, people talking about competition. They couldn't compete. And so we needed to do this for our businesses. And that is, in my opinion, not the right reason to do it. And it's not the city's role, I don't think, to lower competition for businesses, creating an environment for them to survive, and not just survive, but do well in is great. But so, generally I have a hard time with this. So the expanding it out as far as to Piper, it's too much. I feel like it's just this big swath of keeping businesses out and putting a lot of obstacles to businesses being successful too. So I'm happy with the ordinance that was the first one and was approved and recommended by the Planning Commission to the City Council, taking our direction. So to sit up here now again and change it again, it makes no sense to me. So for me and the CUP, I definitely agree with Vice Mayor that the CUP is a critical piece, because for me that says, we're going to restrict businesses, but we're still unintended consequences. We're talking about them all over the place here. And yeah, wine industry having issues. We never thought that was going to happen. TOT monies are down. We need to be cognizant of all of those things when we're making these kinds of ordinances. And so the COP piece allows, in my mind, the option, to make an exception that we may or may not need. It may never happen. Let me finish first. Yeah.
So the 8 number is random, you're right. And it was actually, there are people in the community who came to me with lower numbers, and I kind of in my own mind thought it should be a little higher. And but I appreciate that the council's tested the idea and given it some air, and I'm not going to campaign on that front. So if we're going to stick with 10, there were a lot of reasons, and like you said, it was tested by public comment and the length of time that we've been discussing this. So that's fine. I'm not going to stick with that. I feel more strongly about expanding the ordinance to cover the CD, and for a lot of the reasons that we heard this morning or this evening. And I hope that we will consider that a little further.
Thank you. Ron, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I heard from others, and I was hoping that, as we deliberated on this, that there might be a reason to go with a lower number. But, we've gone around and around on it. The other thing to be clear is that if you are an established business and you are able to grow outside of this, you are grandfathered in. So we are not cutting off any business who here to grow. So I think we can encourage our local businesses to grow and go out and grow, and then have that advantage in maybe some other cities to where they have different numbers. And I think that we are letting them grow. We're just not letting it come in. It's a going out and multiplying type of thing.
Councilmember?
Okay, I appreciate the comments and also from the public, and just not at this meeting, but previous meetings as well, emails, and just, personal meetings that I've had with people to discuss this. Like with any topic, you have an initial gut reaction, right? We're all human. And then our role as council members is to take that comment in and weigh like, okay, well, my gut reaction was this. Oh, that's a good point. And, try to process it. Sometimes we don't have the luxury that the public has, where we're going to campaign for a specific issue and not going to change our mind and got to charge ahead. We have to stay open and listen to the comment. Then looking back on this entire topic, really kind of originated from some of the business practices where you have a local business that might have carried a couple specific lines, and then one of those specific lines then opens a retail location here, which is a big issue for that particular business. And then we've also heard from others where, the fear is if somebody else comes in and they carry this line or that line and they have a bigger footprint, maybe they have an advantage to negotiate with their vendor or supplier, which causes concern. But from the city side, I absolutely appreciate the concern and want to do everything we can do to help. But I get concerned with the micromanaging, like how far down into the weeds do we go on this? And so listen to the comments today and in the previous meetings, I go back to, the bigger picture is that, there are a lot of towns that are dying. Retail is struggling. Amazon is thriving, including in Healdsburg with the number of Amazon trucks I see driving around. And we're having a discussion where we're literally looking at ways to limit businesses in Healdsburg. That is a concern for me. And I even read the Press Democrat had an editorial saying, you leave it to the market, we shouldn't do anything. But I have concerns about that just wide open thing because we do have the plaza. Healdsburg we're not a normal market. I mean, we have market influences, but it's hard to compare us directly with some other smaller towns, no matter, how ritzy or whatever people might say. But I think one of the biggest things that Healdsburg has going for it, and I think this is what we need to keep in mind, is that retail has shifted from destination shopping, like going to malls, to a shopping experience. It's that walkability. And we've talked about this multiple times, whether it was related to housing or downtown. How do we get, Pete made the comment that a lot of people come and they circle the plaza, the rents are higher on the plaza, there's more restriction on the plaza. How do we get more people to go further north? And I think it was years ago that Eric Drew told me about when the building where Willie's is now, when that was built, like people kind of walk around and they kind of look down and then turn around and like go back. And we've heard from our local small businesses that are on the far north how do we get people up there? And I'm very sensitive to that because what Healdsburg does have is between the climate and the, how you feel when you're here, that small town charm, we have a very walkable downtown, and we have, as a council, have made it a point to enhance that. And we're starting to see, we have the SMART train coming, which will also help expand some of that downtown. So there's a lot of opportunities and things to be excited about. And the goal is to enhance the experience of Healdsburg and encourage people, both residents and visitors, to do more than just circle the plaza. Formula Businesses, in my mind, has the ability to draw traffic, and in my opinion, more retail raises all ships. And so in that context, I was extremely disappointed in the negative, almost aggressive tone towards the new business that came in when all this started. And honestly, that business is now employing our local high school kids. So, for me, going back to this ordinance from day one, no matter how I felt on this, I completely agreed that the language that we had was not clear enough. And I commend you for the interpretations that you've done in all these years to kind of navigate through that. Because even when this first came up and looking at that language, I'm like, okay, I think it had regional, right? Like, what's regional? Is that Bay Area? Are we talking, where are we going? And so I really appreciate the time and effort that the staff and our planning commission did in fine tuning the definition of what formula retail is. I think that was key. There's a lot of clarity in that. I'm okay with the outlet and big box language, and I'm comfortable with the boundaries and with the CUP. To your point, we've discussed this, the community has had a chance to weigh in. So I'm comfortable with what's there. And I think at the end of the day, the question is, as was raised, how do we help the businesses that are here? How do we welcome the creativity of a new business to Healdsburg? And what is it we're doing to help encourage that creativity? I've said that before multiple times because we've been through some down markets here. Is what is it we can do? I'm not going to claim to be Mr. Creative and, this tenant should go here, this tenant should go there. We have so many creative people that either come here or live here that see a spot and they can envision something that's there that I wouldn't have even thought of, but they have that creative spark that say, I want to try this here. How do we encourage that? To me, that's what keeps the small town charm when you have that entrepreneurial spirit that is, excited to do something, that energy. And, I'm okay with this language, but then I think we as a city really need to pivot and focus on how do we encourage, a vacant space comes up. What is it we're doing to help encourage that space to get leased versus becoming an impediment? So I talked a lot right now, but I am comfortable with what's here with the conditional use permit.
So it sounds like we may have 3 council members who are fine with the boundaries as we have discussed, the COP, so alternative and 10 or more. So that it seems like that's kind of where we're at this point. Am I correct in that assessment? So alternative 1, I think, is where we're going with this. And I think we're ready to receive a motion to introduce for the first reading from someone. And I assume we need to say which one?
I think it's written, I think that's the recommended action, yes?
Yes, the recommended action.
Okay.
With the revision of section 5 to read that formula retail is permitted within the service commercial district.
Okay. So do we have can we have someone make that motion, please?
I'd like to offer an ordinance of the city council. I got to make this bigger. Sorry. I'm getting old. I need new glasses. All right. An ordinance of the city council of the city of Healdsburg, amending Healdsburg Municipal Code Title 20, Land Use Code, Chapter 20.08, Base Zoning Districts, Article 6, Commercial Districts, Section 20.08.115, 20.08.120, 20.08.125, 20.08.130. Was there a shorter way to do this or just keep going? Go on. All right. 20.08.135, 20.08.135, 20.08.145, Table 10, 20.08.155, Table 12, Chapter 20.28, Administration, Article 9, Definitions, Section 20.28.310, Article V, Conditional Use Permits, Section 20.28.165, and adding sections 20.20.115 to Chapter 20.20, Standards for Specific Land Uses, Article 2, Commercial Related Regulations regarding formula businesses downtown and prohibiting big box retail and outlet malls throughout the city with the changes
to section 5.
To section 5.
Yeah.
Can you repeat that, please? I'll second the motion.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Could we have a roll call vote, please?
Yes, and before I do roll call vote, I just wanted to clarify for the record that you were introducing that for first reading.
Yes.
And waiving further reading of the text. Yes. Wonderful. Councilmember Edwards.
Yes.
Councilmember Hagley.
Yes.
Vice Mayor Harrod.
Yes.
Mayor Mitchell.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you for all that great work. So next we don't have any we go to old business, which we have none. So our new business is a presentation on housing trust funds and similar models Overview and key considerations for City Council. Housing Director Sotomayor is back. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, members of the council. I guarantee you I don't have something to read like that in this presentation, but this presentation before you today is an item that we have talked about for a long time that's contained in our housing element. And today I am hopeful that I can give a good overview about housing trust funds, how they've been utilized, how they might be helpful within our city, and to get a general idea of where the council is feeling about the establishment of a housing trust fund under some of the recommendations that we have been receiving through the Housing Element Work Group in the community. So with that, I'll jump to the next slide. And so today, as I mentioned, is largely just looking at a presentation on housing trust funds and to give some talking points about areas of future consideration for direction. I think that the important part today is I'm hopeful that I can explain how this might fit into our community, what we have heard back from community members, and how this might function or what needs it might fill, and then to get an understanding of if the council is comfortable with the approach that we're taking. Next slide, please. So by way of background, I think it's important to talk about how we got here. And when we started the housing element for the 6th cycle as required by state law, we were also required to have a community advisory board. And in this case, the council established the housing element work group back in June 7th, 2021. They worked extensively with staff and our consultants to help put together the housing element, which was certified on June 29th, 2023. After that, the council decided that the continued work of the HED Housing Element Work Group was needed to explore other areas that are important around housing. One of those being to look for other funding sources, or to look for how do we spur the creation of middle income or moderate income housing, among other things, of how to be creative when we're approaching our housing solutions. And the area that this generally landed under, among other areas that they were focusing on, was to look at housing trust fund or a community land trust or other type of entity, including housing land trusts. I will get into what these different things mean in a different slide. But for right now, just for the purposes of this background slide, we looked at all of those. We looked at creative ways to approach middle income housing. I believe, during the Measure O process and during discussions with the HEWG, this was a topic that was surrounding around our growth management ordinance as well. How do we spur housing that is, not deed restricted affordable, but not high-end market? And how do we approach that problem? Because most cities don't have the tools to do that. And so I'd like to give a special, commendation to our Housing Element Work Group for tackling this, and for the public that came to those meetings. So with this is the last item on that extended work plan. And as I mentioned before, we held public meetings on September 9th and February 24th to explore some of these best practices around these different entities. Next slide, please. This is not coming out of left field. It's definitely in alignment with our housing element. Establishing a housing trust fund is supported by Program 1 and other programs within our housing element. Expanding upon homeownership and workforce housing opportunities is clearly outlined in our housing element. And priority programs is to partner with CLTs and community land trust and housing land trust for long-term affordability solutions. So these are goals that we report back to on the state on an annual basis. And we say, when we put together our housing element, this is how we will achieve the goals that we have. And one of those was to look at housing trust funds or other entities that could bring in different types of funding, could expand our ability to produce affordable housing, and also tap into the various resources we have in this community to address some of our housing shortages with a specific focus to what we need. And as if you recall, a while back, we completed a housing needs assessment that we did in 2019, and then following, we did it again in 2023. As opposed to just using census data or anything like that, our housing needs assessment really hones down on what our needs are within the community. In our conversations when Measure O was being discussed, we talked about the need for producing middle income and missing middle housing in order to meet our workforce needs, to match the jobs that are being created in our community. We also talked about what units we would need that are below market and achieve a certain level of affordability to match the service-related jobs that we have. To put it in context today, one thing that we're very good at as a city is getting the lower income units, because there are a ton of programs, there are funding mechanisms, there are groups out there that do nothing but this, as we just saw with Saggio Hills. We can get those through, but they do take time. The missing piece is how do we build the missing in between? And how do we make Healdsburg have a full life cycle of housing where it's not just I'm in affordable housing and there's no place for me to go unless I leave my community, or that there's a way for people to be able to move up through it. Next slide, please. And I talked a little bit about this already. I sometimes get ahead of my slides, but these are very real needs. And I would say that at this point in our housing environment and where we stand after coming out, well, while we're in the 6th cycle, and as we think in the future to 2031, when we get our new regional housing needs allocations, we got to be proactive early. As we just saw with Saggio and Dry Creek, these projects take 5 to 6 years to get from fruition, from concept to fruition and to lease up. And so we are really in a position right now where we need to think of new strategies to be able to meet our future goals. And why? Well, we have challenges. Limited affordable home ownership. We really don't have anything that is not within a deed restricted affordable unit that's through a community land trust for home ownership. High land cost. We just recently came to the council and we outlined what land the city owns. And we don't have a very robust inventory at this time, or the parcels that we do own have such low densities that they are not worth developing from a standpoint of scale. Workforce housing shortage, we know about this. We have done studies about this. We realize that this is a huge gap that needs to be addressed. And so that's why we need an alternative approach. We have funding constraints. Measure S and inclusionary housing revenue are not sufficient to meet our next cycle of housing, regardless of what that number is. In general, people need to build more than 5 units for us to get an inclusionary unit. And that doesn't happen as often as we would like it, or to keep the pace of affordable housing matching market rate. Or Measure S, we have leveraged very well across different projects, but it is a limited resource. It's our most flexible funding. And therefore, we try to reserve it for the projects that mean the most and the ability for us to. But it is a limited resource. As I mentioned, zoning and density limitations play a role in this. Workforce housing needs. Middle income units fall outside of traditional programs. They are generally, in most cities, developed through regular development and having increased housing supply. And eventually, you do have enough housing supply that prices can absorb high demand. Long-term affordability. I think that this is one that we heard a lot, is how do you control what type of growth, what type of product that you want? Well, the answer is truly to own the land that you have and to be able to put it out and to say what specific product you want. We did that with Dry Creek. We did that with Saggio. We issue a request for proposals and we say, we want to address these needs. But the way to do that is to have the land in the first place. And that puts us in a great position. And I would say that that is what has made us successful to this point in the 6th cycle, is having those lands that we bought from the redevelopment agency, having the ability to tap into Measure S that had been banking up for a while when I first got here in 2019. And then finally being able to partner with nonprofits and leverage that funding. And then inclusionary through our hotels is largely what is making up the bulwark of our housing at this time. And that's not a sustainable practice over time. And alternative approaches definitely are merited when looking at this. Next slide. So how do these work? And this is a pretty big chart. And I think I can sum it up pretty simply. And I think what we're looking at is there's different models out there. And I'd like to start by saying that we'll go through some case studies of how different cities took a look at this, some within our own community, some within Oregon, some in this, the Bay Area. And I think the key is to look at it from a standpoint of what exactly are we trying to address and what is the biggest need. And so as we look at the housing how Housing Trust works. Well, we have community land trusts. We do have a community land trust right now. It's the Housing Trust, the Housing Land Trust of the North Bay, who manages our single-family homes that are built in subdivisions that are inclusionary. The way that practice works is that the Housing Land Trust owns the land. The improvements go to the individual. They get the change in the CPI. It's a great program for getting people into housing, ownership opportunities, and a high-valued market in which more often than not, we need to reduce the down payment to zero and make sure that the payments don't exceed 30% of income. But these only come when we do get the inclusionary housing or we make a deal around these types of products to be placed. Another place that we will see this is up in the North Village around middle income. We'll see a trust model around for sale. And then we also can see that as part of the Saggio Hills project in the final phase, we have townhomes that would most likely use that model as a way to keep affordability. So we do have that capability right now. And why these are good is that the land stays with the trust, it keeps getting reused, and you keep using that asset over time. Housing trust funds, as opposed to that, this is more of a mechanical, this is more of a government type program in which we take public funds, we take private funds, and we can get it matched through programs through the state. But it's more of a funding mechanism that actually is used to either fund community land trust, housing land trust, or affordable housing projects. It's more of a financial mechanism than it is a mechanism that goes out and proactively if you will, acquires land or does more of a development type of role. It's more of a funding mechanism, much like what the city does with gap financing. And so we do have some of those capabilities already, and we could leverage our existing funding around a model like this. There are some caveats to it, is that once you take state funding, the ability of Measure S, if it's a matching fund, is reduced because you take on the state requirements. So it is kind of it's a good model for providing gap financing, but this is something that we do have the capacity within our housing department. Now, when I get to this last one, if you can't tell, I've been building up to a housing land trust, and what a housing land trust does that is much different is that it would look to actually hold, acquire land bank and get us, if implemented, into a position where we have developable land. It could take on private donations. It can be funded through a housing trust fund. It could be funded through the city, through private philanthropic grants. It could have all sorts of uses. But in all reality, this is the program, a housing land trust is which one that goes out, can purchase land, can land bank it. It could have components of all three. It could have pieces of that. It could have its own housing trust fund. But I think for today, what I was hoping to do is to delineate what these different things do and to focus on, perhaps as we go forward, as the housing land trust is potentially what we're discussing today as a model, as the HEWG, and through public comment, we have heard that that is more of a desirable approach to what our current needs are. Next slide, please. So there's a lot of considerations in this, and I think that it's very easy to get bogged down into details of what this can look like. And I think that there's some very important details. One is the governance structure consideration. There's always the question of, is it a city managed versus independent nonprofit trust? What type of public-private partnerships could it have? And then finally, the biggest question is oversight and accountability. I made a chart that kind of shows the pros and cons of each one of these, and I'll get into it. But that definitely, you know, when I look across other cities, when they create these are the common themes, is how do we make sure it's doing what we want to do? How do we make sure it's funded correctly? Who's going to be in charge of it? And how does it fit into our overall housing needs? There's a lot of different possible funding sources for nonprofits that are involved in housing. Measure S revenue is a potential funding source. It's a potential partnership if this is a nonprofit. State and federal grants exist, and obviously tapping into philanthropic contributions or private investment. And then finally, one of the things that I will share with you in some of these case studies is, as these trusts or these entities start to mature in their operational ability, some of them begin to lend, and they start to create a sustainable model through the lending practices that they're using. And I think ultimately the goal is for any kind of trust or nonprofit is to be able to sustain itself through its own programs. I think that takes a lot of capital in the initial beginning, but definitely the one thing that we can look at and the one thing we can know is the structures that can house something like that and give it the ability to scale over time. And then finally, policy and regulatory frameworks is, it's important to think of, any entity that might be created and how does it align with our housing element policies and RHNA requirements. And I think as we look through the housing element, housing production in general is needed, and largely, the ability to have land to be able to put out or to be able to offer and control the product aligns very well with our requirements. City representation on the trust. Some cities have council members as a member or an ex officio or some type of position that can be there for a board. I think that largely depends if it's a community created entity or if it's a council created entity, if it comes, how is it put together? And then finally, expanded roles into development. There's nothing, in many communities, what started as a trust ends up becoming an infill developer or some type of other program that starts to look at programs as well. I'll share an example today in Bend where a home buyer program is done through one of these programs. It started with city money, but definitely leveraged over time, and it becomes almost an extension of the city's ability to lend money for down payment assistance. A lot of cities run that program. We're a much smaller department. It may be very beneficial to find a nonprofit partner that could tap into resources such as community banks or other sources of funding that could match that. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, one of the key factors is to decide, is this independent or city managed? And I can say through the public meetings and what I've been hearing through input from the community and public comment is the desire for any type of entity that might take this on to be independent of the city, to be a nonprofit, was largely brought up multiple times. It seemed to be a general consensus among those that spoke. And I think there's some benefits to that and that I can outline here. And sometimes there's some drawbacks too. But I think from a benefit standpoint, what do we get if it is a nonprofit? Is that one, if you look at the legal and compliance, is if the council creates a body, it becomes a Brown Act body, and we lose some of that nimbleness that comes with a nonprofit or a private organization. For example, is the noticing of meetings. If we have to move really quick to purchase land or to do an option, that puts the same constraint that the housing department has on a nonprofit. And so we become kind of the same entity of having to notice, move, and go as fast. Now, maybe they can have more meetings or maybe not, but I think that in general, what you see across different cities is they choose around having an independent nonprofit for that very reason of trying to keep it more nimble. I think that the larger, even more so than that, is that we also has funding sources that we can't tap into. Most, private donations are not generally given to cities for programs, but they are given to nonprofits. I think that there's a lot more partnership opportunities there. I can tap into some examples here, such as the Renewal Enterprise District within Sonoma County that has been successful as a nonprofit as well as a joint powers authority. But it definitely is something that has been proven to be successful. Land banking and acquisition in general, holding land as a city is possible, but it's not always the best way to approach things. Having a nonprofit that you can partner with is a great idea of being able to have that ability to go out. I'll give you one example of where the nimbleness of a nonprofit plays into it is in optioning properties. For example, if there is a property that we see as a potential future affordable housing site, with some money, a nonprofit can go out and try to hold that property through an option agreement with the owner. We did that as a city around the Scattered Sites project when we went after those properties and then transferred it to a nonprofit owner. And that was the model that we used through a memorandum of understanding. Whereas if a nonprofit does it, that's just cutting out one more step and gives them the ability to go after those types of projects. But I think at the center of all of this is really the flexibility and the ability to tap into different funds. And I think that you get the most bang for your buck with an independent nonprofit. It seems to be what, it's not seems to be, it is what the Housing Element Group is recommending along with the public. It also then becomes more, well, how do we spur that development, which I'll get to towards the end. Next slide. So We have plenty of examples that we can pull from. And as I mentioned before, I think sometimes it's important to keep in mind that we need to focus on what our specific needs are, maybe in the near term and then the long term. But there are some great examples that already exist in Sonoma County. And one of those is the Renewal Enterprise District, or the RED. This is a regional housing trust fund. It accelerates infill, transit-oriented, and mixed-income housing. It provides flexible financing for affordable and workforce housing, and among other things. It leverages public and private philanthropic investments, and also with some regional collaboration. And the reason why I put this one down is that there are existing examples and there are potential partnerships with existing trusts if that so is desired. Is that one thing that the RED has the ability to do? It's a joint powers authority for governance. So that means the city and county of Santa Rosa staff the governance, and then it's a nonprofit when it comes to its lending. One thing that the RED does different is it lends to market rate products, and it also lends to below market rate products. The market rate helps to subsidize the loans that go out, but the loans are creating a sustainable funding source, so that money that's being put into the RED is coming back and being relent out as projects go forward. Now, that's a long-term process, as some of these might be 30 years or 55 years of lending. But the idea is that the model was started up with money that was granted to this entity through some of the fire settlement funds, and then used to leverage and to help rebuild and to lend out and to keep it sustainable. And I think the key takeaways for us is that this model leverages multiple funding sources. It's not just pulling from government sources. It started with that, but it's leveraging other sources that it can bring in from private donations. And then it has an ability to sustain itself, as I mentioned, through its lending practices. Next slide, please. Another one is the Housing Trust of the Silicon Valley. Now, this one's much bigger, but one thing that I noted on this one is that it plays into a couple of areas that are important. Once again, it has a revolving loan fund. And I think what you'll find is a lot of these entities do gap financing, much like what we do for affordable housing. We will say, hey, you have a gap in your rents to the total cost. The city can put in X amount of dollars in exchange for an affordable housing agreement to keep these units here. And then they go out and find other programs that help to do that. A lot of these groups can do that as well, but without the complexities of necessarily having to go after low-income housing tax credits. They can lend to a project to make it viable on their own if they have enough lending. I think another area of this is down payment assistance, as we mentioned before. It seems to be a common theme. Mix of public-private capital, and it also, this model is a little bit more unique in the sense that it also it doesn't just focus on loans, it also lends into grants and other types of programs to spur affordable housing. The flexibility within these models is huge, and truly I think of it as like a computer. As long as you have the right operating system, the software that you choose to run through it, it doesn't matter. It can go through. It could be a banking account that we could leverage against. It could be gap financing. It just matters what board is there, what capacity they have, and what type of funding that they have over time. Next slide, please. And so the Bend model, here's a good example of an independent nonprofit housing trust. And this one is a little bit different. It's in Oregon. It has a different kind of mix of things, but one of the things that we can take a look at, and I thank Jim Hyde for bringing this model to my attention, is the independent nonprofit approach. It got a start from a program, which is the government program, $25 million for land development. And they pull from the city of Bend's affordable housing fee when they do programs for $750K for down payment assistance. They have the private partnerships. They're a little more focused on home ownership, but one thing that is interesting is they go and they do purchase land. They help facilitate these projects. And it really becomes another arm of development of affordable housing, and it plays a unique role. And I think in any one of these cases, I think that most cities have looked and said, what are we not capable of doing on our own, and where do we need to expand? And I think through our conversations with the Housing Element Work Group is, as I mentioned before, we're very good at building low-income housing at 80% and below. We got a ton of programs. What we don't have a ton of programs for is building housing that would fit the needs of those that just make too much to be an affordable housing that's deed restricted, but not enough to be a market rate. And there are models out there that focus on moderate to middle income housing. And that is something that I believe a nonprofit has a little more flexibility on, is that they can build programs around that. They can be more focused around potentially this housing type. They don't need to be limited. But I definitely think that that's a benefit of what something like this could do. And so if we could jump to the next slide. So to wrap it up, I think, I mentioned a lot of different things, but what specific areas could a housing trust model, where could it be very helpful for Healdsburg? And I'll say it from the perspective of how do we meet our next housing goals and what do we need to do that? Land banking. The success that we had came from owning land and being able to issue RFPs, whether that came through the Montage Development Agreement or the RDA purchasing Dry Creek. That really is what gives us the ability to go out and get what product type that we want. The ability for a nonprofit to go out and secure land and to be able to use private capital to do that, or to accept donations of land that maybe the community wants to give. Those are all things that can be leveraged over time. It's something that perhaps the city could partner with a nonprofit on. You have land, I have a need for housing. That could merge together. They can merge, they can partner with a developer. There's a lot more flexibility in that strategy within a trust that can hold in land bank with private funds than there is within a city in my experience of being able to do that. The RDA used to be our pathway to be able to do things like this. Now, if we tie up Measure S, it impacts other programs or other abilities to do programs with that. Development partnerships is huge. As I mentioned, the RED is an existing housing trust. There's opportunities to partner with a trust such as that and to be able to work with them and pull from their lending capital if that's something that is desired. There's an ability to raise money here and to be able to have that and to use that and leverage with the RED if we could get a larger loan. I think it really just gets down to how creative the group is that would like to start such a program. As I mentioned, workforce and middle income housing definitely could be a focus of such an organization. It is a missing piece that we have that could also alleviate the burden on our limited housing stock. Home buyer assistance is always something that you see in these. I think as more money or private funds come in, that's something that could be done. Sustainable lending could be a goal of it. And then infill development may be something that it could look at over time, is that some of these eventually do find their way to become maybe the trust no longer and expands out, and then they have an infill development. In San Diego, we've seen that in practice where they keep it very low cost, and they've been successful in creating middle income housing or moderate income housing without subsidy, but by using this land banking strategy. And then finally, the biggest, I think this should have been at the top, but it's conduit for donations. Capital is always needed. The secret to affordable housing has always been money. And any way that you can get money that you don't have is a great way to continue forward. And I think that within our community, there is a charitable heart. And I think if the right story is told, that there would be interest in seeing a way to invest in the community to ensure that those that live here have a way to stay here, and those that want to be here have a pathway to continue to build and grow their lives here in Healdsburg. Next slide, please. So with that, as I mentioned before, my hope today is to gather, to affirm the council's interest in the housing department, continuing to explore this. I think in the format that has been recommended through the Housing Element Work Group, is there's been a large desire for this to be coming from the community, to be a community. And so that really starts to ask us the question, how can we do that? And well, how do we get the community interested in this? Well, I think right behind me, there's a lot of people that are very interested in this. I think that through our Housing Element Work Group meetings, there's been interest. I think that I have heard this since I've been here, is that we should tap into something like this. I have no doubt the interest exists. I think that we have so many great community members out there. I think that there's different ways that we could approach it. One could be that we issue a challenge grant and we say that the city would be willing to offer some money if the community comes forward and says, we'd like to start this, that the city could help do that. We could provide technical assistance. We could help, provide technical assistance around financial feasibility. One thing that I did do is I reached out to a consultant group that has developed quite a few of these. There are groups out there that specialize in looking at your community, what donation base is out there, and developing, hey, here's what you would need if you wanted to lend out money and you wanted to keep this thing going. Here's what you would need if you wanted to go buy a piece of property and hang on to it. And I think, taking a look at that and getting the community interest is that you could build a very decent model. And as I mentioned, leadership and seed funding might be just the way to do that. I think for the time being, the Housing Element Work Group and through their meetings, we've seen a lot of interest out in the community. But I would definitely be interested to hear if the council is interested in the pathway that we're going forward. And I think if that's the case, that the housing department can continue to go out and try to build up that community support. And if there is a need for some type of investment or some way to get this catalyzed and out there and starting, I think that we have a number of ways that we can approach that and come back to the council with a viable approach with that. And so next slide, please. That hopefully I didn't spend too much time just talking about, but I'm happy to answer any questions or be able to hear any comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen. That is fascinating, and there's a lot of details to it. I really appreciate it. You put it out very clearly. Thank you. Councilmember Hagley, you had a question?
Yeah, real quick on the land banking, where?
That's a good question. I think there's a number of sites that, and so this is actually a very, the question cuts to the heart of it is that the amount of large sites that are available like Dry Creek or others that are readily available with the right densities to be able to make affordable housing work are very limited. And I think that, when we went through and we looked at our city-owned properties and we did our downtown capacity study, we have shown that if we get the right densities, we can do that. Now, maybe one of my fears around Measure O was that with increased densities, right, that we as a city buying parcels that are good for affordable housing would then be competing with people that maybe saw that as an opportunity and the prices start going up. But right now we do have an opportunity to take a look at larger parcels. There's a number that I have, but I would hate to speculate right here and say that's what I'm trying to target on. But there are a few, I think if we're leveraged correct, I think that we would look at infill sites as well. I think one big area that I failed to mention earlier is looking at churches as a possibility. Looking at parking lots that maybe have the ability to have housing put on them. We have a few untapped resources such as that, or underutilized land, or maybe even going out purchasing and acquiring fourplexes that need to be remodeled. I think either way, just having raw land that can support enough density to make it worthwhile, or to be able to hold it until it is worthwhile is something that a nonprofit could do probably a little bit more ease than a government entity.
Yeah, this is really exciting. I mean, I really like this direction. As far as flexibility goes, when we're talking about donations and so forth, which of these can we center it so that those funds would stay in Healdsburg? It wouldn't be like, I know there's a big need in the county and everything, but I'm really more concerned about Healdsburg so that we could have those donations stay in Healdsburg specifically, sort of like our continuation of our local preference to where we'd be able to build that into one of these trusts.
I think there's a number of ways that that can be addressed. I think as an independent nonprofit, that becomes a little bit more difficult. But if the vision is put together and the articles of incorporation do say that this is a Healdsburg specific type of entity, then there are ways to say that this nonprofit focuses on our community. If the city were to put funding into it, as what we normally do is we give funding, we have some conditions with it. And that's something that we can take a look at if they choose to accept such funding. I think that on top of that, a good example of a nonprofit that eventually became more independent is Burbank Housing was created by the county and eventually started going out and doing much larger things. So there's always a chance, if it's not delineated in the articles of incorporation or in the bylaws, that it could get big, but maybe getting so big that you have the capacity to go out further may not be a bad thing. But that's, I think, one of the trade-offs is that in the very beginning, you'd probably have to make sure that that was delineated in some, as the entity was created. Or as the city maybe partners with them over time, is that as we give money, we say this has to be in Healdsburg. And that's our local control, is if we partner with such a nonprofit, if it is independent, that we would condition it upon our partnership that it has to be in Healdsburg. But maybe not limiting the group to that, but limiting what our investments are. Hopefully that.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Vice Mayor?
Thank you. You are always a waterfall of information, and I really appreciate the passion you bring to this and how much thought you put into this whole project. And I know it's not just you, but thank you. I've got two questions. Is it safe to characterize this sort of endeavor as a way to finally capitalize on the opening that was created by the voters with Measure P? Is that safe, or does that limit it in some way?
So let's say theoretically this is funded, nonprofit, independent, and it chooses to develop it. It could access Measure P permits, but it would face the same challenges, I think, as any other developer has with Measure P, is that the deed restriction and the income verification tends to discourage people that could afford the same product without. And I think one thing that and this is speculation, I'm not sure if we'd have to look at it project by project, but you take the land cost out, you may not need that type of mechanism. You could definitely deed restrict them, but if you can lower the prices to just be naturally within that affordable range by, you leverage your private donation, the land cost is that's just the cost of building, and that could be the way to spur it. Mm-hmm. And so could it tap into Measure P? Absolutely. I think that there's more to think about around Measure P than just whether or not, that it could work. I think we need to maybe look at it from how was it implemented too. We do have 3 Healdsburg Avenue right now that has Measure P units that are in development. I'm very excited. We're getting the marketing plan back. I'm excited to see how those are received, who rents them, what kind of incomes that is, and whether or not they find them to be. That's the challenge with Measure P units, is that we haven't had a real chance to evaluate how useful they've been in action.
Great. Thank you. That's an interesting answer. My second question is, sounds sort of skeptical. I'm actually super excited about this, and I look forward to talking a little bit more about that. But assuming that we want to start small and log some early wins with this and build over time, but assuming we were very successful at that and moved at a good pace. At what point, and to what degree are we really approaching the housing needs of our community with this program on its own?
I think there's two answers to that. I think one is the state, and the other is our community needs. And from a RHNA standpoint, going into the 7th cycle, we don't know what that looks like yet, but I have no doubt that it's going to be more than what we got last time. And how do they fit into that type of production is if they can acquire the land, we can put it out for low income housing if that's a partnership that they or we establish. I would say for how do they fit in to address the middle income housing is is by owning the land, you really can control the product type. You can start to say that, I can give you an example of how it might work is that, let's say this nonprofit started in the very immediate beginning, it got some access to capital and it could go and hold a parcel of land on an option and then go out and reach out to, let's say, a developer that works in middle income. They could form a partnership and one could provide the land, driving down the cost, and the developer could get that going. And I think that you have a right formula there to get the missing middle housing that we've been talking about at the right price point. And that would have to be the combination of those charitable donations mixed with, developer expertise. Over time, though, I've seen it before as these nonprofits start to build that experience, and then they don't need the developer as much. And in some communities, you have, like Burbank Housing is a good example, ones that start to build up and become very independent and start bringing projects to you. And I think that that would eventually be hopefully the end state for such a organization.
So you would be optimistic that we'd actually meet those missing middle housing need assessment numbers at some point?
I don't know.
They're pretty high. And
it is very high. I would say that I think that my answer to that right now would be that right now we don't have anything really to help us meet that missing middle.
Right. Well, that's part of why I'm excited.
Yeah, and I think that, and I'll say this is that I don't even feel like something like this is a nice thing to have. I feel like it's the missing tool to our housing problems, and it's the key to how do we get to maintain our success in housing and set ourselves up in the future so that we don't fall short and lose our ability to control our own land use.
Great, thanks.
Mm-hmm.
So on the ones that aren't income restricted that we're talking about potentially building, how would that work with our current GMO?
They would still fall under the same, they would still have the same limitations as anybody else if they were doing market rate developments that would need an allocation. I think that speaks towards the measure P, is if they become very trained in getting those done and they're successful, that would be 150 permits for them. And potentially that could become their bread and butter. I say that because there's so many possibilities that it almost is overwhelming. Almost there's too many things that this could do that if I were to say what's the immediate need, it's probably land banking to make sure that we got a good spot, but they definitely could tap into that if it became more of a development arm. I really think that, if the board is correct and the funding starts to pour through, and we could support them with some financial modeling that could get them started and understanding what goals they have for fundraising, that over time, that I think the initial successes of something like this will build a story and hopefully drag more donations into it.
That's really exciting. I agree. So the city's role, if we're talking about the the nonprofit model, not the city and the combination, how would that work for the city to have input and whatnot? Would it be they're bringing projects to us? I'm not sure I see how that connection works.
So, and this is all, dependent on how it's set up but I think where the city's role really plays into it is that from the council, we set housing policy from the council, and the needs are RENA cycled through the city, and having a community-focused organization, much like I would hope that this relationship could be like the one that we have with Reach for Home, where we both understand the mission. That it's kind of hard to say that that's guaranteed, but I definitely think that our housing needs are so specific that it would be hard to stray from a type of housing product that wouldn't benefit somebody. If we're donating land towards affordable housing, that's great. If the land is going towards market rate development with an affordable component, there's still the affordable component. I think that as the organization has stood up and we look at the models, we're a little bit more informed on that. I think where the city can kind of play a role is to get that initial conversation going. I think if we reach out into the community, we reach out to some of our foundations here, we start finding that, and we can find the right amount of money. My recommendation would be to have a consultant come through and develop those financial models and be able to set up a game plan, a long-term game plan for such an organization.
Thank you. Any other questions from council? We'll open this up to public comment then. Please come on forward and tell us what you think. Welcome. Yeah, set the timer to 1 minute.
Thank you. Funny. Haha. Joe Nyokas, former city council member, resident of Healdsburg for over 30 years now. So this is not a new idea to me. Director Sotomayor brought it to us during my tenure. And you know, it was I immediately taken by the idea. At the time, though, we were as a council, we were focused on passing Measure P and letting Measure P kind of take effect and letting the market respond to Measure P. So as you know, the voters approved Measure P, but the market didn't quite respond as we had hoped, right? And so now the years have passed, we tried Measure O, favored by the market, but pretty soundly rejected by the voters. So I think the time is now for this concept, for a lot of reasons. Mostly it's your best bet at kind of a middle way to address the missing middle. Measure P gave us some significant opportunities. Measure P, but also all the other various combinations of mechanisms, tools that Director Sotomayor mentioned, that there are still some significant opportunities for developing housing units that are that might not pencil out from a purely profit margin perspective for a traditional for-profit business, but these opportunities could provide a meaningful return for the right contributor with the right context, with a context like this. I can say that from conversations within the community that there is no shortage in Healdsburg of interest in meaningful investment contribution opportunities like this, right? I think that voting to proceed, giving us the signal to the community that you are interested in supporting interesting, creative, thoughtful ideas like this, that will say a lot. That will say signal to the community that yeah, you're behind this. You're willing to step up if the community is willing. I would suggest take a lesson from the software development community and focus on this concept of MVP, minimum viable product. Start small, find a quick win. Maybe if it's just one property with 2 units, great. You succeed. Learn, go from there, move on, right? Iterate and grow. We're here. We're ready. You say the word, and we're ready to go. Thanks.
Thank you, Joe. Anyone else? Welcome.
Hello, I'm Mark McMullen from Parkland Farms. Thank you, Director Sotomayor, for that comprehensive presentation on the Housing Trust options. It's really very informative. And I wanted you to think, as we consider the future of housing in Healdsburg, let's look at this decision through the lens of not just affordable and middle income housing, but also as an opportunity to create vibrant, culturally rich neighborhoods that support our diverse community. Of the 3 models presented tonight, the Independent Housing Land Trust offers a unique chance to address multiple pressing needs in Healdsburg. By acquiring and holding land for future development, we can ensure the long-term affordability while creating the spaces to foster creativity and community connections. Imagine a Healdsburg where artists and service workers can afford to live in the community that they help make special. Picture mixed-use developments that combine our housing with gallery spaces, performance venues, or maker studios. These aren't just buildings, they're incubators for our local culture and creative community. We can make those decisions if we have control of the land. The Housing Land Trust approach allows us to be strategic in the land acquisition, potentially securing the parcels near the cultural districts or in the prime areas for revitalization. This isn't just about putting roofs over our heads. It's about building neighborhoods where people of all incomes can thrive and create and contribute to the Healdsburg's unique character. Moreover, the model offers flexibility in funding and partnerships that would be crucial as we navigate the complex landscape of the housing developments. By leveraging the diverse funding sources and collaborating with nonprofit developers and arts organizations, we can create projects that truly reflect our community's needs and aspirations. This is what we have been talking about for years. As you consider the options before you tonight, think boldly about the potential of the Independent Housing Land Trust, not only to address our critical housing shortage, but to do so in a way that enriches the cultural fabric. Let's seize the opportunity to create a Healdsburg that's both affordable and vibrant, where creativity and community can flourish side by side. This is contained within the Arts and Culture Master Plan, surprisingly enough. If you want to go and read Goal 5, you'll see that. Finally, I'd like to invite you to the St. Patrick's Day Celtic Concert next Monday at noon in the Plaza. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Welcome.
Good evening, Richard Berg, Healdsburg. The nonprofit Housing Land Trust becomes a tool like a Swiss Army knife. It's not just about buying land. It becomes an engine, a financial engine that could offer lots of other strategies for capitalizing on the capital that lives in Healdsburg. It could potentially borrow money if it has started with a good base. It could pay interest on loans. Nonprofits have a lot of flexibility on how they achieve the purpose which they're created for. And I think the Independent Nonprofit Housing Land Trust would be a little engine in Healdsburg that could take advantage of opportunities that appear as time goes on. It's difficult to imagine, given what's happened to real estate values in the last 20 years, how in the world we're going to buy land and bank it for future housing needs. But look what happened to the Cherry Building. Someone offered $7 million to turn that into a community asset. I think that represents the tip of the iceberg on what's needed for capital-rich residents in Healdsburg to apply their money to the community's benefit. The Foleys don't even live in town as far as I know. They might actually. But there is a lot of capital in town. And if you have an engine that can reward them for contributing to the well-being of the future of the city, I think people would line up to do it. What will it take? Well, I think the council will have to support the launch, but the Community Foundation, Healdsburg Forever, even the Chamber of Commerce, which I have suggested for years could be the nexus of solving the housing problem for the employees of the members of the Chamber of Commerce. I don't know that they've ever taken an active role in sharing with you a solution to that problem, but they represent another entity which has a stake in how we resolve these issues. So thank you.
Thank you. Welcome.
Good evening, I'm Deborah Kravitz from Healdsburg. Healdsburg has done a great job. Our housing department has done a stellar job in pulling the levers and using all the tools that we currently have at our disposal to tackle our housing challenges. This is the missing piece. It gives us another tool we haven't previously had that can take us to the next level, give us additional flexibility, give us speed, alacrity to address housing issues. The city's great, but it moves at a glacial pace. These things take a lot of time. So having this separate entity that's independent, nonprofit, has the nimbleness, it can, if we do the proper fundraising, it'll have the capital to take on these challenges and make a real dent. And while we've done an excellent job so far, the next RHNA housing cycle is going to be a massive challenge because we've essentially used up the land that the city had to exploit for these types of issues. We've gotten housing built by hotels. We're not building more hotels. We've kind of saturated that market, so we've lost that. So this is really a new untapped resource and an important tool. And so I just ask you to be bold here and be creative and let us see what we can do with it. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else wish to speak? Welcome.
Good evening. I'm Todd Everett. I live outside of Healdsburg in zip code 95448. And there are a lot of us who are real stakeholders in our community. This is our town. And so we very much want to see a town that allows for all the things that we've been hearing about tonight, of a whole variety of different types of people who can live here and thrive here. And I've been following the housing thing for a long time, and it really does come down to financing. That really is the critical variable. I observed Measure O and why that might not have passed, and there are a variety of reasons. But one of the reasons is the credibility that there actually would be constructed housing that would fit into a certain range, that solved the issue of workforce and middle housing. It just was no guarantee. I think what you're hearing is that there is tremendous interest in the community to be able to leverage private funding and government available grants and get super creative and do the land banking, but also subsidize and be able to create a mixture of housing that covers the spectrum that represents the needs that's been identified by the Housing Element Working Group. So I want to recommend, one, that you endorse city staff to work on this as a city goal. It's a priority that you allow them to go out and do the spade work. Two is allocate some money so that they can retain a consultant to work with them on structuring and organizing the nonprofit. It would be seed money, but there's work to be done going out into the community, bringing a certain level of expertise, working on the articles of incorporation, figuring out how to set it up, how to leverage it, the kind of expertise that needs to be on the board of that nonprofit. And I think a year from now, you can look and say, wow, we've really launched something here that is that missing tool to enable us to afford to create a whole range of different kinds of housing, whether it's in a development or whether it's infill. So anyway, that's my thought. Thank you.
Thank you. Welcome.
Thank you. Marilyn Joyce, Healdsburg. I just love everything that's been said tonight, and I love the energy of it. And one thing that I felt was missing from Measure O was a community vision, and tonight is the seed vision. We need funding that's independent of government right now because we don't know if we're going to get government funding anymore. So this gives us that nimbleness, that flexibility, and it's more sustainable, it's resilient, and I feel that the density that we could create that feels organic, that when it happens in Healdsburg, it's still Healdsburg. It's not a strange neighborhood that we didn't ask for, and that it's incremental, and that it can happen within existing neighborhoods in ways that neighbors come together and come up with friendly partnerships with the city and neighborhood policies that allow that to both benefit homeowners and benefit the people who would move into those neighborhoods. So I would just suggest that we bottle all of these ideas that have been presented tonight and bring that forward when we look at a community vision. And I think a community-led vision is what we're missing. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Anyone else? Not seeing anyone, and I'm going to go ahead and close the public comment, bring it back to council. Call for comments, questions. Who wants to go first? Ron.
Always had in the back of my mind, and I've talked to the director of the Donate 2, that you could, when you sell a home, an estate could donate 2% back to some type of vessel that could help our community build new housing. We do have a lot of philanthropical people here, but they don't have anywhere to go. I mean, how do they know? Where can it be put? And I think that this discussion shows that this council is determined to bring housing to Healdsburg. And I think that we've tried a lot of things. We keep trying. We keep on trying. We don't give up. And because we know the responsibility we have to house our community. And so I thank you, Stephen, for bringing this. The excitement in the community, the excitement in the audience. It's really nice to hear that we're back on track. Feels like we're back on track in housing. We're just not going to say, oh, well, we're going to take our rocks and go home. We're going to keep trying. And I think that this is a good way to show that, okay, let's show that we can finance this. And then when we have the control of the dollars, then we have the control of the product. So thank you.
Thank you. Yeah. Vice Mayor?
So my hope for this meeting, I mean, sensing strong consensus from just about everyone in the room, is that that at some point in the near future, we get a much clearer view of what these first steps are going to be. Somebody called it the launch. So, you know, what does the council need to do to take those very first steps? So there's probably a couple different directions. I think, you know, in terms of the options you brought forward to us, I fully support the Independent Nonprofit Housing Trust Fund, and I suspect that's the case with my colleagues, but we'll hear them out. And you know, so if you need that limitation, then for me, certainly, I think that's your recommendation, and I accept that. And I think if we can get some concrete options for what to do next, then, you know, we'll have something that we can, you know, start to show the community and, you know, find out who has their hands in the air. And, you know, I mean, it sounds like Joe has his hand in the air, and I'm really grateful for that. I know there's others people, and I know that there's generous people in this community who want to participate, either financially or as leaders or organizers or whatever. And so you know, what do we do to reach them? And of course, there's a strong formal component that has to be drawn out before we can bring it to the people. And so that's what I hope to see here at some point.
Thank you. Councilmember Higley.
Yeah, I would support the independent nonprofit housing trust format. I think the city for this, I mean, we've talked about it, like to Joe's point, this is something that we discussed years ago, but the context is key when you're, you know, considering everything that has gone on over the last 8 years between COVID and fires and priorities where we're acquiring apartment buildings and, you know, building things up and different developments coming on. So I definitely like this. I like the idea. I, on the other hand, would like to see, I think the next step is to come back with a proposal. I would like to see minimal input from city staff. I think we are in a supporting role. If this is really, where we're looking to the community, with this nonprofit, and, it's almost one of those where, like I said earlier with the small business, what is it we can do to help? And more importantly, almost get out of the way until, we're needed to. But I almost feel it's from that standpoint, this is it. The more that we're involved, the more complicated it gets. And we see that constantly. And so I think this is something where, what can we do to kind of help facilitate it? Whether it's like the SDAT, where there's like an initial seed funding to, all right, here we go. And then it, is off. And then I look forward to, the feedback, or just watching what happens with that, because there might be some things that we need to address that come out of that community effort that actually has the funding, that then we can use that to say, all right, we need to tweak this, or yeah, we support that. Or, like you talked about churches. Well, then to make this happen, we need this, and this. Now we're responding to that. So those are kind of my thoughts.
Yeah, I agree with that. I also would say about the independent nonprofit would be it seems like the right next step. I feel like we've done about everything we can do from a council and city perspective on all of the housing, and this really feels like something that can be successful. My only caution would be on the fundraising piece. Being a big fundraiser on the Humane Society board, when we came to Healdsburg, we assumed that everybody was going to support the shelter because they all love animals, and we needed a lot of money, but it didn't necessarily work out that way. So I think it's important to know your audience and know what people want to spend their money on, and that, so that the fundraising piece isn't all that easy, right? I think we need to remember that. So I'm not saying it can't work, because obviously there's a lot of models out there that have been successful. And I know we have a great philanthropic community who want to help, but they all, everybody has their own thing that they want to do and help. So it's not necessarily going to all go into this. But I agree with Councilmember Hagley too about the concern of, how much role is the city going to have in this, and support. I see us in a supporting role. I assume that's the plan, and I'd love to see how that would work too, because we only have so much capacity as well. And that's part of why it does, why this is great. It can give us all that community spirit, input, labor, all of that. So, yeah, I'm in full, go forth and conquer. Vice Mayor.
Thank you. I just want Councilmember Higley to firm up that I think we're in agreement about that direction, that really this shouldn't be, this city shouldn't have its hands on it for too long. And I think probably, there's important steps like making sure that the mission and the bylaws reflect the values of the community early on, and, so that as we let it go, we're confident that it's going to go in the direction that suits our values. And I don't think that's a heavy lift, but basically just to make sure that there's pieces in place that would make it successful in the beginning. And then it becomes a partnership, like many of the other partnerships, Corazon, Reach for Home, and so on, that have been really just super positive influences on our community.
Yeah, I agree. And I think the purpose of this is to kind of give direction, and then you're going to come back, because we're also missing a council member where we can have a little bit more detailed discussion, right? That's the purpose of this meeting. But I do want to point out, Corazon, Reach for Home, those are already existing organizations that then we helped lift up. And then, what we're talking about here is, a new new organization that's, going to go raise money and do things. And I think independence is kind of valuable here, to allow the maximum flexibility, versus constant, thumb on the scale from city council. And I think there's a need, and to Joe's point, this is something we talked about a long time ago, but, I mean, that's kind of where I'm coming from. And again, this is the first presentation where we kind of did the big thing here. So I'm just sharing my feedback to the presentation, hearing from the public. Once we get some concepts of what to consider and we have a full council here, I'd be curious to see how that, comes together.
And I think, Councilman Haley, by us saying what we want, we can encourage people to come in, to come to us with ideas, because we are limited to 5 and we've got a large community. And I like the idea of, let's see what they can spur on, what we can spur on and encourage them to come up with.
Okay, thank you. So you have the direction you were seeking, I suspect.
Yes, I was hoping that today I would get direction to continue forward with this. I think next step for me would be going out into the community and working with interested individuals and finding out what it would take for them if they choose to do this, and come back with a recommended if we need seed funding or something of that nature. But as we saw today, there's a lot of interest behind it. So awesome. I did get the direction.
Great, and thank you. And thank you everybody for being here and commenting as well and being ready to support it. I like that. Thank you. So thanks, Stephen. Okay, well, that moves us to council reports on matters of interest occurring since our previous meeting. Who wants to start us? Ron?
I'll kick us off. I was actually able to attend the economic summit at Sonoma State University, and it just keeps reinforcing, the more of these I go to, that the problems that Sonoma and Marin kind of jointly have is an aging population, which is really, and people staying in their homes with not enough housing, kind of putting a little limit on our economic growth. So that was a very enlightening conversation there. I was able to go to the ribbon cutting this morning of Truett Hurst. So it's nice to see a winery moving from outside of town into town. They've done a really nice remodel of that space. And so looking forward to them continuing to be part of the community. And that's it for me.
Thank you. Councilmember Hagley, nothing? Vice Mayor.
Yeah, I don't have anything really to share in terms of activities, but I do want to bring an item to the council for consideration for a future agenda. We were all, I believe we're all at the mayor's and council members meeting, and we heard a lot about the fear in many communities, but certainly here about the threat of immigration actions from the federal government and how that's impacting communities. And it's certainly true here in Healdsburg. And I've been giving some thought to that, and I've had input from some people who thought the right thing for us to do would be to go in the direction of a sanctuary city, but the arguments against that I think are really strong, and most people seem to agree that that approach sort of puts a target on the community, and it doesn't really change the laws. It doesn't do anything to improve the situation of people who are feeling these concerns. And, we're not just talking about immigrants, we're talking about their families, their friends, their employers, and it's very widespread. And it's, so we're not talking dozens of people, we're talking hundreds and hundreds of people in our community. And this is the report from Corazon, is that, they're inundated with concerns from people. So what I would like to propose is that we do something to share what people really want to know is do they have the support of the leadership of the city? And so there's something in terms of a statement that we could create, but also, what I have in mind is something that we would mail to everybody that would have those sort of statements, but also resources, phone numbers, and a rundown of what their legal rights are presently, because a lot of people don't know this stuff. And the report from the libraries, which I know firsthand, secondhand, is those little red and yellow cards are flying off the desk. And so there's a real need for that information, but there's also a real need for that support. So my suggestion is that we consider a conversation about doing some kind of direct, bilingual, by mail communication with the community about this issue.
I can certainly support that.
Yeah, I would support it, and strongly, our police chief's presentation was very clear on the direction that our police department goes. It was very clear on how that policy actually solves crime. I mean, that I think a lot of people don't realize that, but it's a protection of our community that we protect all of our residents, because we need everybody to have a civil society.
So
important point. Thank you.
Yes.
So I have a question. So I'm not clear on what the ask is, because in 2016, 17, we did a statement, it was a proclamation, I think, because this issue came up. It was one of the first meetings that I was on. So we've made a statement that we've been, and then our police chief just kind of reconfirmed what our position is and how we behave. Is the request that it sounds like mail out information, right?
I want to put something in the mail to everybody in Healdsburg. So not just Instagram, not just, city manager has spoken a couple times about this issue. Thank you. That's important. Police chief has spoken about it, but I want this to be in the hands of every Healdsburg resident, not just the people who are concerned about this, but everybody really needs to kind of know what the situation is, and I think know that it's that we're supporting people with the specifics of the legislation that's already in place, but also just morally.
So we're not discussing here.
Yeah,
but
I don't want to get into the weeds. Thank you. That's right. We don't want to get into the details,
Yeah.
but the proposal is discussing something we put in the mail, we pay for it, and then we'll
Like in the
have a
utility bill,
conversation about what's in it at some point. Yeah.
So is this something that we can circle back on here?
So so just to clarify, the request here is for a future agenda item,
Yes.
at which point you.
Yes.
And it's to discuss mailing something to the public, not to consider becoming a sanctuary city.
That is my concern.
Just to clarify. Okay.
I hope that I made that clear. Yeah.
So yes, okay.
So I believe we have support, and we will have this on a future agenda. I always like to ask us when we have a request is level of urgency from the council so that we can to meet your expectations.
My opinion is that it is very up right now. I mean, in terms of people's feelings in the community, and talking with Marcia Corazon, that there is some urgency on this. I'm not sure I can put a time on that, but it is a now issue.
Yeah, it certainly is, but we also have a pretty packed future agendas too. So we got to figure out how to fit it in with that, right? I would leave you guys.
Okay. Well, we'll take that sentiment and do the best we can.
Okay. Thank you.
Understood.
Thank you. Anybody else with anything? No. Okay. Then I will adjourn this meeting at 9:17.